Chapter 278. After Qin Shi and Emotianga left, the forest became quiet. Lei Dongqing touched his bald head and looked at Daoist Kumu. What's wrong with Qin Shoujing? He wasn't this kind before. Madame Feng sneered and said, I'm afraid he has some thoughts about this junior martial sister. I really didn't expect Qin Shoujing to have such a day. Woman Feng. Lei Dongqing squinted at her. Are you dissatisfied because you couldn't seduce him? Madame Feng still sneered. No matter how talented Qin Shoujing is and how handsome he is, what does it have to do with me? Aren't you jealous at all? Lei Dongqing asked recklessly. Madame Feng was annoyed. Old Lei, get lost. I'm not that bored. While the two of them were arguing, the other three people didn't say anything. After a while, Daoist Kumu finally understood and looked at Jing Xingji. Fellow Daoist Jing, what do you think? Jing Xingji, who had been thinking, shook his head. I can't guess Qin Shoujing's thoughts. Since he doesn't want to accept, we can only do this. Daoist Kumu and Tong Tianyun glanced at each other, feeling depressed. They were clear about Qin Shoujing's ability. Back then, he was already the strongest among them, let alone now. The peak stage of the core formation realm was much stronger than the middle stage of the core formation realm. In fact, they were afraid of inviting Qin Shoujing this time. After more than 80 years, no one knew how strong he was now. Last time, when they saw him fighting with Jing Xingji in the middle of the night, they secretly asked Jing Xingji about it, but Jing Xingji didn't say anything. However, judging from his expression, he was obviously very afraid of Qin Shoujing. Now that Qin Shoujing left, the strength of their team was greatly affected, and they didn't know whether they could pass the next hurdle or not. Tong Tianyun knew what Daoist Kumu was thinking and whispered, it's good that he left. Otherwise, we still have to be on guard against him. Daoist Kumu nodded inwardly. Indeed, Qin Shoujing was a great help, but if he fell out with them, it would be troublesome. Clearing his throat, Daoist Kumu raised his voice. Everyone, since those two fellow Daoists have other ideas, we shouldn't force them. Only the 5 of us will go next. We all know that. Lei Dongqing pouted. There's no other way. Old Daoist, let's find a place to rest first. There aren't many people, and they're all injured. Among them, Madame Feng was the only one who had suffered the most serious injury. Naturally, he said this for her sake. Upon hearing what he said, Madame Feng's expression eased a little, and she also looked towards Daoist Kumu. Hesitation flashed in Daoist Kumu's eyes, but he quickly made a decision. All right, let's get out of here as soon as possible and find a safe place to rest for the time being. In any case, their current strength was a bit lacking, but Madame Feng couldn't be left behind. Once they were out of the forest, Qin Shi summoned his flying cloud and flew close to the ground with Emotianga in his arms. Emotianga moved several hundred miles away before she finally raised her head and asked, Are you all right now? Qin Shi stopped the flying cloud and let go of her. With an expressionless face, he said, It's all right now. You should adjust your breathing first. After a while, your spiritual aura will flow smoothly. Emotianga looked around. The place they were currently in was a flat grassland. What was rare was that this place was full of pure spiritual aura and didn't have any devil aura at all. Because of that, the weeds grew very lush and green. It was a normal color. She randomly chose a place to sit down and meditated cross-legged. The 8 Immortals pill was actually a kind of medicinal pill that could help with cultivation. It was concocted from 8 kinds of rare spiritual plants. When one took it, the spiritual aura seemed chaotic, but in fact, it was because the medicinal power of this medicinal pill impacted the meridians. As long as one meditated and adjusted their breathing for a while, the medicinal power would flow smoothly. Just now, when Emotianga took the 8 Immortals pill, they casually got some blood from the Fengxing beast's corpse, so it looked like she was attacked by a demonic beast. If one looked carefully, it would be very easy to see that she wasn't really injured. However, men and women were different, and Qin was here, so Kumu and Daoist Kumu naturally wouldn't look carefully. Emotianga began to adjust her breathing. Qin raised his hand and summoned the 3 young real fire sword. With a wave of his hand, the sword turned into thousands of red sword lights that leisurely circled around the 2 of them, forming a sword formation around them. When Emotianga finished adjusting her breathing, she opened her eyes and saw this incomparably gorgeous sword lights. She secretly praised in her heart. No wonder there are so many sword cultivators. Not only are they strong in fights of magical powers, but their sword moves are always more gorgeous than other spells. Seeing that she finished adjusting her breathing, Qin, who was also meditating on the side, also opened his eyes. Done. She had completely dissolved the medicinal power of the 8 Immortals pill, so her meridians were very smooth. Qin stood up. Then let's go. Emotianga silently stood up and followed him. Qin knew the route of Kumu and the others very well, so he deliberately avoided them and chose another direction. Since we're not going the same way as them, we might as well take a shortcut. Emotianga was a bit confused. Senior Marshal Brother, since we can take a shortcut, why did we go with them in the beginning? Qin didn't speak for a while. After a while, he said, there's a spiritual plant growing on that road, which is the main material for concocting clear sky pills. After a pause, he continued to say, more than 80 years ago, I entered Demonic Mountain together with them. Whether it's in terms of strength or character, they were both passable. Besides, your father was also friends with them back then, so presumably, you'd also be willing to meet his old friends. He was now in the peak stage of the core formation realm, so no matter how powerful clear sky pills were, they were useless to him. Presumably, the second reason was the real reason. Emotianga lowered her head and didn't say anything. She didn't know whether this was an illusion or not, but it really terrified her. Ever since she left Xianqing school with him, the things that happened and the times they spent together made her doubt what she originally believed. She vaguely felt that this was the senior martial brother Qin from back then. There were some things he didn't need to do at all, but if he did, there would be no other reason than to think of her. Could it be that her previous perception was wrong? It wasn't that Qin was Qin Shoujing, but that Qin Shoujing was Qin. It's useless to talk about this now. He sighed softly, looking very worried. This time, not to mention others, Kumu and Old Tong are obviously disloyal. That being the case, it's better if we don't go the same way as them. It'd be best if we don't run into them again. Emotianga answered with her head lowered, absent-mindedly. Qin noticed this and turned to stare at her. What are you thinking about? Ha! Emotianga felt as if she was caught doing something bad on the spot, so she was a bit flustered. No, nothing. After staring at her for a long time, Qin turned back. Focus. There's only the 2 of us, so we can't be distracted. Got it. Before they set off, she was resentful that Qin ignored her existence. Now that they were on Demonic Mountain, she had to be more careful if she didn't want to be looked down upon by him. Emotianga took a deep breath, threw her messy thoughts to the back of her mind, and followed him briskly. After walking for a while, Qin suddenly stopped and listened attentively, seemingly using his divine sense to detect something. After a while, he said, "How's your breath-concealing technique?" Breath-concealing technique? Emotianga didn't understand what he wanted to do. However, although her breath-concealing technique was ordinary, it wouldn't be a problem for her to pretend to be immortal with the spirit-concealing pendant on her. She immediately stopped using the art of chaotic origin, concealed her aura, and asked, "Is this okay?" She was slightly surprised. What kind of breath-concealing technique is this? It's actually so miraculous. Tiange shook her head. My breath-concealing technique is really ordinary. I have to thank Senior Marshall Brothers' spirit-concealing pendant for this. When I met Great Ancestor back then, Great Ancestor refined this pendant again. With this thing, I can completely conceal my aura. I see. With this explanation, she felt relieved. Since a deification senior refined this pendant, it was naturally much stronger than when he refined it. Tiange hesitated for a moment, then asked, Senior Marshall Brother, if we completely conceal our aura, we won't even be able to release our protective spiritual aura. What if we encounter a wandering restriction? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, he waved his arm, taking back the light curtain formed by the 3 yang real fire sword that had been protecting them. He then used an art. After a while, he also didn't carry any spiritual aura on his body, just like her. After that, he took out 2 talismans and handed one to her. This is a spirit-transforming talisman. It can form a barrier around your body. Outsiders can't feel it, but it can block those restrictions. Tiange took it, nodded, and stuck it on her body as he said. After that, she said, there are people fighting ahead. Their cultivation levels are only in the foundation building realm, but we don't need to cause trouble. We can just go around them. Tiange didn't object. They had their own destination, so it wasn't worthwhile to get involved in a dispute for these spiritual treasures. They were only foundation building cultivators now. Maybe some core formation cultivators would pass by later. If they got involved, they wouldn't be able to get rid of them. After doing all that, the 2 of them turned into flight lights and continued to move forward silently. After a while, Tiange also sensed something with her divine sense. There were spiritual aura fluctuations in the distance. 2 groups of people were fighting. This was a common occurrence on Demonic Mountain. Although there were many secret treasures on the mountain, there were dangers everywhere. Cultivators below the nascent soul realm didn't dare to go too deep and could only try their luck in the periphery. If they happened to see a spiritual treasure, just like the boat-shaped magic weapon they saw, it would cause a lot of people to fight over it. Therefore, on Demonic Mountain, not only did they have to guard against the restrictions left behind, but they also had to guard against demonic beasts, poisonous creatures, and sneak attacks from other cultivators. In this way, most of the cultivators who died on Demonic Mountain were killed by their own kind. Tiange was about to quietly go around when she suddenly stopped. There were 2 groups of people fighting. One group had 6 people, and the other group had 5 people. In the group of 6, there were 4 men and 2 women. Most of them were in the early stage of the foundation building realm. 1 man and 1 woman were in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Although they had 1 more person than their opponents, they were in a suppressed situation. Among the 5 opponents, 4 were in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, and only 1 was in the early stage. Right now, both sides were fighting fiercely. Magic tools were all used, and spells filled the sky. Near them, Tiange saw a stalk of spiritual plant that looked several thousand years old. Although they were fighting fiercely, they cautiously avoided that stalk of spiritual plant. Apparently, they were fighting because of this spiritual plant. Seeing that she stopped moving, she turned his head and asked, "What's wrong?" Tiange stared at the people in the field and said, "Look at them." Chapter 279. She turned around and looked at them. His brows slowly wrinkled. "They're people from Yunwu's sect," Tiange finished his sentence. She sighed softly as she looked at their black robes. This was a set of clothes they were familiar with. Fortunately, the sex emblem was still a few clouds. It seemed the matter Lu Yidao talked about last time had succeeded. Yunwu's sect had retaken its monastery and from now on, it no longer needed to be bullied by Zisha's sect. What made Mo Tiange stop wasn't only because she saw Yunwu's sect's disciples, but because the two women among them looked very familiar. It's them. She also recognized them. After watching for a while, Mo Tiange turned around and said, "Senior Martial Brother Shoujing, if you want to go, then go. They're just a few foundation building cultivators," she said flatly. Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment then nodded. "Thank you." The 6 people from Yunwu's sect were obviously at a disadvantage, especially since their opponents were all male cultivators. While they were fighting, they also made dirty jokes about the 2 women among them. When the 2 women heard their opponents teasing, one looked ashamed and resentful, while the other looked extremely cold. Mo Tiange couldn't help but recall that nearly 70 years ago, when they were in Miwu Valley, they were also teased by Zisha sect's disciples. Both of them were angry at that time, but now, one looked disappointed and ashamed while the other ignored everything. She sighed softly and released her spiritual aura pressure. The spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator shrouded them. The 11 people present were all shocked and stopped fighting one after another. When they turned around, they saw Mo Tiange standing not far from them and she standing behind her. The first thing the 5 non-Yunwu sect disciples noticed was the clothes they were wearing. Shocked, they hastily bowed and saluted them. Turns out it's core formation seniors from Xianqing School. "Juniors greet you." Upon hearing what he said, the people from Yunwu's sect were also shocked. They also bowed to greet him. "Juniors greet seniors." Mo Tiange nodded and looked at the 5 cultivators first. "Which cultivation group are you from?" Shame appeared on the 5 people's faces. The leader answered respectfully, "Senior, we were originally disciples of Jingxin sect." Jingxin sect. He had never heard of this sect. The leader was very quick-witted. When he saw the confusion on her face, he immediately said, "The Pure Heart sect is just a small sect. Now, it was destroyed decades ago. After we destroyed our own sect, we became rogue cultivators." "I see." This kind of sect extermination wasn't rare. There were many small and medium-sized cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole. If their talents withered or if they provoked a powerful enemy, it was very likely that their sect would be exterminated overnight. Those who escaped had nowhere to go for a while, so they became individual cultivators. Seeing that her attitude was amiable, the man became bolder and said, "Does Senior fancy this crimson-red grass? If Senior takes a fancy to it, Junior will naturally offer it up with both hands." The corners of Mo Tiange's mouth couldn't help but curve upwards. This man was very good at talking. Although the 5 of them were stronger than the 6 people from Yunwu's sect, it didn't mean that Yunwu's sect had no chance of winning. If she took a fancy to this crimson grass, they naturally wouldn't have any hope. The implication of this person's words was that he directly took the credit for offering the grass and ignored the people from Yunwu's sect. In any case, they also wouldn't dare to raise any objections. The 6 people from Yunwu's sect naturally understood the meaning of his words and glared at each other. The man immediately raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't tell me you want to compete with a core formation senior for this spiritual plant." Upon hearing what he said, the people from Yunwu's sect became even more angry and anxious. On one hand, they felt this person was really hateful. With just a few words, he wanted to frame them for wanting to compete with a core formation cultivator over a spiritual plant. On the other hand, they were afraid Mo Tiange would really misunderstand. Among the 6 people, only the middle stage foundation building female cultivator looked calm. At that moment, she respectfully bowed and raised her hand. Since seniors want this spiritual plant, Junior naturally doesn't have any reason to compete. "Senior, please don't listen to this person's provocation." Mo Tiange stared at this female cultivator. Her expression was calm and her manner was magnanimous. She really had the courage to stand on her own. She couldn't help but sigh again. Senior Marshal Sister Wang, long time no see. Once she said that, the female cultivator was dumbfounded. The other people present, including the 5 non-Yunwu sect cultivators, were also dumbfounded. Senior Marshal Sister Wang, they all heard Yunwu sect cultivators call this female cultivator, and they indeed called her Senior Marshal Sister Wang. Who was this core formation senior in the end? She actually called this female cultivator that. The 2 Yunwu sect female cultivators stared at Imotianga attentively. All of a sudden, one of them cried out in surprise, Your junior marshal brother Yi. Imotianga smiled and nodded at that person. Senior Marshal Sister Xin. These 2 people were Wang Qianyi and Shenbing from back then. Shenbing's cultivation level was in the early stage of the foundation building realm, but her beauty hadn't decreased from before. As for Wang Qianyi, she was already in the middle stage of the foundation building realm. Compared to Shenbing in the past, she wasn't very eye-catching. Now, however, she was as cold as ice and as beautiful as a peach. Imotianga couldn't help but recall the bitter experiences they had all these years. Back then, Shenbing was forced to become a concubine while Wang Qianyi married her enemy. More than 10 years later, Lui Dao mentioned to her that Shenbing was already free while Wang Qianyi was still married to that person. Imotianga didn't know whether they had escaped from the sea of bitterness or not. Judging from their current appearances, they seemed to be living pretty well. Upon hearing Shenbing's reminder, Wang Qianyi also remembered. Astonishment appeared on her calm and composed face. You're really junior marshal brother Yi. Imotianga nodded with a bitter smile. They hadn't seen each other for more than 60 years. She never expected their next meeting would be like this. Upon seeing this scene, the expressions of the 5 people in the small group changed greatly. They never expected this core formation senior would actually be acquainted with the other party. Right now, their faces were filled with apprehension and trepidation. They didn't know whether this senior would kill them out of anger or not. After hesitating for a long time, the leader finally said, "Turns out these fellow Taoists are senior's old acquaintances. Juniors really had eyes but failed to see. I hope senior won't take offense." In the end, he was already begging. Imotianga cast them an indifferent glance then said, "That'll do. I won't make things difficult for you. You can leave now." Upon hearing what she said, the 5 people were overjoyed. They repeatedly cupped their hands and said, "Thank you, senior. Thank you, senior." They didn't dare to stay any longer. Using their flying magic tools, they quickly fled into the distance. Imotianga no longer paid attention to them. She smiled at Wang Qianyi and Shenbing. Not bad. Senior martial sisters have a good memory. Upon receiving her affirmation, Wang Qianyi and Shenbing glanced at each other, feeling very strange. She was wearing Xianqing School's robe, emitting the spiritual aura pressure of a core formation cultivator, and her movements were confident and calm. She was completely different from the cautious and smiling junior martial brother Yi from back then. What made them feel even more strange was that although junior martial brother Yi was a handsome youth, he didn't look like a woman at all. On the other hand, Imotianga in front of them was elegant, she obviously looked like a woman. After a long time, Wang Qianyi sighed with a gloomy expression. Turns out we were blind back then. Junior martial brother Yi, have you been well these years? Where did you go? Imotianga also sighed when she mentioned the past. When she met Lui Dao at Xianqing School, although they talked about what happened after they parted, she asked him not to reveal her whereabouts. Although Lui Dao wasn't too kind about Su Jingji's matter, it seemed he still covered it up for her. About what happened back then. Senior martial sisters, when you go back, You can ask Senior Marshal Brother Lu. Senior Marshal Brother Lu knows. Wang Qianyi was surprised. Mo Tiange nodded and didn't say much about this issue. Instead, she asked, Senior Marshal Sisters, why did you come to Demonic Mountain? Wang Qianyi sighed and said, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, you might not know this, but although we recaptured Yunwu's sect, we suffered disastrous losses. We only have a few core formation cultivators left. If we followed the usual routine, I'm afraid we wouldn't be able to advance to the core formation realm, so we came to take a gamble. I see. Mo Tiange thought for a moment then said, this place is already very dangerous for foundation building cultivators. Take this spiritual plant and go back. In the end, fated chances aren't as important as your lives. Shen Bing was pleasantly surprised. Junior Marshal Brother Yi, are you saying you'll let us have this spiritual plant? Mo Tiange nodded. She naturally didn't care about a mere 1,000-year-old spiritual plant. She thought again and took out several jade bottles and talismans from her robe. Now isn't the time to reminisce. If we're fated, we'll go out and talk about our feelings after we parted. Take these medicinal pills and go out. This dangerous place isn't something you can handle. Wang Qianyi silently took the things Mo Tiange handed her and solemnly saluted her. Thank you. Mo Tiange smiled. Without saying anything, she turned around and walked towards Qin Shi. Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Wang Qianyi called out from behind her, You. How are we going to find you in the future? Mo Tiange waved her hand. Go ask Senior Marshal Brother Lu yourself. We'll meet again someday. Once she finished speaking, she once again concealed her aura and left with Qin Shi. Watching their backs, Shen Bing's brows furrowed even tighter. She suddenly asked, Junior Marshal Sister Wang, look. Isn't that Senior Marshal Brother Qin? Senior Marshal Brother Qin. Wang Qianyi didn't understand what Mo Tiange meant at first, but when she recalled that person's appearance, she was also shocked. Is that Senior Marshal Brother Qin? It's most likely him. Shen Bing watched their backs as they left together. Her expression was complicated. So Junior Marshal Brother Yi is actually a woman, and he also became a disciple of Xianqing School together with Senior Marshal Brother Qin. I really don't know what they experienced. The two of them looked at each other in silence, pondering in their hearts. Mo Tiange's appearance reminded them of many old things. Some of these old things were very happy, but some were very sad. The other four cultivators were dumbfounded as they watched what happened. Finally, one of them couldn't help but ask, Senior Marshal Sisters, why did you call that Senior? Junior Marshal Brother Yi. Wang Qianyi smiled bitterly and said, more than 60 years ago, she was a disciple of our Yunwu sect. Presumably, she was a woman disguised as a man. What? The four people were shocked. More than 60 years ago. Senior Marshal Sister still hadn't built her foundation, right? Correct. Wang Qianyi stared in the direction they left. At that time, Junior Marshal Brother Ye's cultivation level was even lower than ours. She was just an aura refining disciple. We originally thought something bad had happened to her, but unexpectedly, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. Mo Tiange couldn't help but think of these words. Back then, Junior Marshal Brother Yi, Senior Marshal Brother Qin, and Senior Marshal Brother Jiang disappeared together. The branch master also said that Junior Marshal Brother Yi was a traitor. Both Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing didn't believe it, but since they couldn't find Mo Tiange, they couldn't do anything about it. Later, they gradually forgot about this matter. She really didn't expect that after more than 60 years, they would actually see Junior Marshal Brother Yi again. Only then did they discover that she was actually a woman and had even formed her gold core. Shen Bing said in a daze that Senior Marshal Brother Qin seems to have also formed his gold core. They are actually so talented. Chapter 280. After seeing Wang Qianyi and Shen Bing, Mo Tiange's mood was somewhat heavy. For the first time, she witnessed the tragic fate of female cultivators. One lost her father and had to marry her enemy. The other lost her freedom and became a puppet. They were cultivators, but they were also women. Without enough power, they couldn't even protect their bodies. This world was just so cruel. Fortunately, they seemed to be doing well now. Although they didn't have enough pills and were still struggling on the path of cultivation, at least they had freedom. After thinking for a while, Qin suddenly asked, "Do you sympathize with them?" Mo Tiange was stunned for a moment before she answered, "Of course. They were very miserable. How is it terrible? For a woman, if she can't even protect herself, of course it's miserable." She didn't say anything. No one knew what he was thinking. The two of them concealed their auras and avoided the other cultivators. Their journey was daunting but not dangerous, and they arrived at the foot of a mountain. Mo Tiange looked up. "It's so high. Even if we fly, it'll be very difficult to fly up, right?" Demonic Mountain was the highest mountain in the celestial pole, worthy of its name. This mountain peak pierced straight into the clouds, and its peak couldn't be seen at all. She said, "There's a place we can land on, so flying up won't be a problem. It's just that." He stared at the lightning formed by the intertwining spiritual aura and devil aura in midair. "There are a lot of restrictions on this place. If we're not careful, we might turn into ashes." Mo Tiange was shocked. Ashes scattered and vanished in a puff of smoke. In other words, they couldn't even be saved. "Don't overthink it. She said calmly, "It might take us 2 days to reach the summit. There are still many restrictions up there that need to be broken, so it's very troublesome. Let's go up there as soon as possible." The two of them used their own methods to protect themselves. Mo Tiange used the art of primordial singular energy and took out the white silk handkerchief, transforming it into a mist-like barrier. Qin, on the other hand, also used his body-protecting art. He also made the 3 Yang real fire sword transform into a body-protecting sword formation that surrounded the two of them. Mo Tiange hesitated for a moment before saying, "Senior Martial Brother Qin, you, come a bit closer to me. I don't have enough spiritual aura, so I can't reach this protective magic weapon." She was stunned. He didn't know whether it was because of the way she addressed him or because of what she said. In the end, he only responded softly. This peak was called 10,000 feet peak. Although it might not be 10,000 feet high, it was not far from it. The spiritual qi and devil qi in this area were turbulent and intertwined with each other. The two of them did not dare to fly too fast and could only advance bit by bit. To maintain the same distance, Mo Tiange didn't use her own flying magic weapon. Instead, she boarded Qin's flying cloud. Half a day later, the two of them rested on the mountain wall for a while before continuing forward. At this moment, they were already close to the place where spiritual aura and devil aura intertwined in the sky. They were surrounded by protective spiritual aura, followed by defensive talismans, then a layer of spiritual aura formed by Mo Tiange's white silk handkerchief, and finally, Qin's sword formation. Even with 4 layers of defense, he did not dare to let his guard down. When she passed through the spiritual aura and devil aura, Mo Tiange heard the sword formation outside making buzzing sounds. Fortunately, the 3 Yang real fire sword wasn't an ordinary magic weapon. Whether it was spiritual aura or devil aura, it was able to block it. However, every time he blocked it, the sword formation would emit a red light, and Qin would have to stop for a while to resist it. The two of them went up bit by bit, but the higher they went, the more difficult it became. In the end, it was no longer Qin's problem alone. Although his sword formation could block most of the attacks, it couldn't completely resolve them, so Mo Tiange used the white silk handkerchief to help. Qin Shi had already said that they couldn't be the slightest bit careless in this place. As long as the spiritual aura and devil aura broke through their defense layer, there would be no way to save them and they would instantly turn into ashes. Here. When their spiritual aura was about to be exhausted again, Qin Shi pointed at a tiny crack in the mountain wall. Inside it was an extremely small cave. In order to resist the restrictions, gales, and lightning formed by the intertwining spiritual aura and devil aura, they had to maintain enough spiritual aura. Now that their spiritual aura was almost exhausted, they had to find a place to adjust their breathing and recover. The two of them squeezed into this small cave with difficulty and heaved sighs of relief. The crack in this cave was very small, so they could only pass through it sideways. With the mountain wall blocking them, there were no gales or big restrictions. There was only weak spiritual aura and devil aura. But it was really too small. It was only big enough for the two of them to sit side by side. They were so close together that they almost couldn't move. Mo Tiange felt very uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being so close to other people. Just as she was about to lean to the side, she heard Qin Shi say, "Don't move. Quickly meditate and recover your spiritual aura." Mo Tiange knew what he said was right, so she could only endure it. She sat cross-legged, slowly adjusted her breathing and entered a meditative state. After a while, her spiritual aura finally recovered, and she opened her eyes. A large mass of devil aura floated over from outside and blocked the entrance of the crack. Qin Shi had already finished adjusting his breathing and was waiting for her. He was startled and said, "Wait a moment. There's too much devil aura." The devil aura on Demonic Mountain was very violent. Once it sensed cultivators' breaths, it would rush forward and swallow them. Most of this devil aura was left behind from the distant past era. How could cultivators resist it? A small mass of devil aura could be eliminated, but such a large mass of devil aura couldn't be avoided. This mass of devil aura blocked the light that leaked through the crack and also blocked the sounds outside. Darkness and silence embraced each other. Cultivators' eyesight was better than mortals'. Even if there was no light, they could roughly distinguish the things in front of them. But there was no light, and everything in front of her was hazy. This kind of haze made Mo Tiange restless. She heard light breathing. After listening for a while, she seemed to hear a heartbeat again. At first, it was calm, but it gradually became rapid. She pressed her chest and found it was hers. Strange. She tilted her head and thought to herself, "I just finished meditating, so my heart shouldn't be beating so fast." This kind of depression also seemed to affect Qin Shi. He moved, and his arm rubbed against her sleeve. The faintly discernible contact made Mo Tiange even more afraid to move. It seemed too close. Even their breaths were intertwined. This kind of awkward silence didn't last long. Suddenly, she heard Qin Shi say, "That year, your father and I also flew up from here." Mo Tiange was stunned and turned her head. In the darkness, Qin Shi's eyes shone brightly. He said softly, "At that time, a big restriction collapsed. More than half of the people who stayed on Demonic Mountain died or were injured. Your father and I happened to be here, so we avoided the disaster." "This place," Mo Tiange murmured. She reached out and touched the mountain wall next to her. "Father, has he also sat here and touched these stones?" "We hid for 7 days before the restriction finally stabilized, but, when we went out the way we came, we found we couldn't get out." Mo Tiange suddenly remembered that the restriction on Demonic Mountain only existed for about a month. If the restriction reappeared, they wouldn't be able to get out. And if they stayed here, they didn't know when the restriction would disappear again. The situation inside was unpredictable, and ordinary people couldn't wait until Demonic Mountain opened again. Then, how did you get out? The secret is up there, she said. There's a place they call Immortal's Ruins. According to legend, it's the place where immortals fell and were buried in the distant past era. The road to Immortal's Ruins is full of difficulties and dangers. Countless people died on that road in the past. However, they didn't know that there was actually a shortcut. If you go up this tens of thousands of feet peak, you'll reach the back of Immortal's Ruins. Mo Tiango was stunned. There's a road in Immortal's Ruins that leads to the outside world. Qin Shi shook his head. That's not accurate. The terrain there is very complicated. No one knows which place Immortal's Ruins is referring to. After we were trapped on Demonic Mountain, we searched many places and finally found a place with a restriction that could be broken. Hearing this, Mo Tiange thought for a while and became even more confused. If we can get out, can't we also go in? Doesn't that mean we don't have to wait for the restriction outside to disappear? Qin Shi smiled and said, your thinking is too simple. At that time, we encountered a lot of dangers. When we found that place, we were all injured. Your father's injury was especially serious, he almost couldn't survive. When we gradually finished taking medicinal pills, his injury still didn't improve. After a pause, he continued, my injury was relatively light, so it wasn't a big problem. But even if we found that the restriction in that place was relatively weak and could be broken, we didn't have enough cultivation. According to my calculations, we needed to have at least the cultivation level of the nascent soul realm. Moreover, the restriction on Demonic Mountain is very special. If it wasn't because our inner force was weak, even if it was broken, the restriction would repair itself. I also thought so, but after I went out, I found that the restriction inside looked weak, but the one outside was much stronger than the one outside. Then, what happened next? The cultivation technique I practice is called the art of 3 primordial cycles. The 3 primordial auras are the 3 primordial auras of extreme yang, extreme yin, and neutral. The word cycle means a kind of secret technique, Qin Shi said slowly. If I can absorb enough spiritual aura, I can temporarily break through my realm and reach the nascent soul realm. But this kind of nascent soul realm is only an illusion. It can only last for a very short period of time. The consequences are even more serious, it will make me fall back to the aura refining realm in an instant. So that's how it is. Mo Tiange suddenly saw the light. No wonder father could help him leave Demonic Mountain. No wonder he lost a lot of his cultivation and became an aura refining disciple. When he was in Yunwu's sect, his cultivation probably really fell back to the aura refining realm, right? Qin Shi continued, when your father found out about this, he thought about it for 2 days and told me that his injury wouldn't heal anyway. That being the case, he was willing to use his cultivation to help me get out of trouble, but I had to promise to take care of his descendants on his behalf. I promised and even swore on my heart demon. In the darkness, his gaze swept over her and he said softly, at that time, I didn't care at all. It was only a trivial matter. But I didn't expect it would be you. That was all he said, but it was enough to make people's imaginations roam. It would be her. What? What did he mean by that? The darkness and silence almost made her blurt out the question. But in the next moment, the devil aura gradually dispersed and light shone in again. He turned his head and his voice became cold again. All right, let's continue. Chapter 281. The two of them cautiously went out through the gap, stepped on the flying cloud again, and used several layers of defense to fly up slowly. Right at that moment, they suddenly heard an eagle's cry. The two of them turned their heads and were both shocked. Not far away, between the turbulent spiritual aura and devil aura, a swift figure flitted past. When they took a closer look, they realized it was a giant horned eagle. A 6th-rank demonic beast. She frowned. The sword formation formed by the 3 young real fire swords shone, and the flying cloud descended. There's more than one over there. Mo Tiange pointed in another direction high up in the sky. There were also 3 giant eagles in the 6th rank flying there. One 6th-rank demonic beast was fine, but there were 4 in total. 6th-rank demonic beasts were equivalent to middle-stage core formation realm cultivators. Moreover, they were in midair, surrounded by drifting restrictions and gales, as well as lightning surging with spiritual aura and devil aura. Mo Tiange felt cold sweat all over her forehead. She was still very calm. The flying cloud continued to descend. The single giant eagle screeched again. They immediately felt the attention of the 4 giant eagles on them. The eagles screeched at each other a few times before flapping their wings and flying towards them. They came with bad intentions. Upon realizing this, Mo Tiange took out several magic weapons, including the magic weapons and spiritual talismans Lord Daoist Jinghe gave her. In midair, the giant eagles living here had an absolute advantage. Even if their cultivation levels were higher and they had more tricks up their sleeves, they would fall from here if they weren't careful. They'd been flying for almost a day. If they fell from here, they'd definitely die without a burial place. In the blink of an eye, the giant eagles arrived. They were as fast as lightning, and their flying speed was really amazing. She was still controlling the flying cloud to descend. When he saw the giant horned eagles pouncing on him, spiritual light gathered in his right hand, and the true form of the 3 young real fire sword appeared in his hand. He only had time to lift it up, and the sword aura collided with the eagle's claws. This power. Mo Tiange's face turned pale. The demonic beasts on Demonic Mountain had indeed mutated. How could a 6th-rank demonic beast have such powerful power outside Demonic Mountain? Mo Tiange didn't have much time to think because another giant eagle crashed into them. She took out an earth element square seal and was about to use it, but she stopped her. It's not convenient to use magic weapons here. If you make too much noise, it'll cause the restrictions to collapse. Mo Tiange was dumbfounded. She once again repelled the giant eagle. At this time, the flying cloud had already descended to the place where they were hiding. He pushed Mo Tiange and said, "Go in." Mo Tiange didn't listen immediately. She looked outside and saw that the 4 giant eagles were continuously ramming into them. She was worried about these restrictions, so he didn't attack them. Instead, he just used the sword formation formed by the sword aura of the 3 young real fire sword to block them. However, the strength of these giant eagles was too great, and they cleverly attacked him in batches. He was completely in a passive state of defense. "I can help. Don't talk nonsense." She didn't even look at her. His gaze moved back and forth between the several giant eagles. "Quickly go inside. Do you have a way?" This time, he didn't even answer. He pushed her away and used his body to block the gap. With his actions, she had no choice but to go in. She had no choice but to carefully climb in. Just as she was about to pull him in, he withdrew his hand. "Senior Marshal Brother." Mo Tiange was rather anxious. "Aren't you coming in?" She didn't answer. He made a sword art with both hands, and the sword formation suddenly shone brightly. Under the covetous gaze of the 4 giant eagles, how could he have time to go inside? Mo Tiange couldn't see what was happening outside, so she could only use her divine sense to observe. The 4 giant eagles whistled again, and one by one, they charged towards him one by one. He didn't move, enduring the spiritual aura impact of those giant eagles. When the sword formation gathered enough spiritual aura, he waved his hand, and a red sword aura chased after one of the giant eagles. Attacking them one by one was the only way. Relying on its swift body technique, the eagle flapped its wings to dodge. Qianxi's sword light indeed couldn't reach the speed of this eagle. However, when the giant eagle thought it could easily dodge, it saw that the sword light turned in its direction and chased after it again. The giant eagle let out a shrill cry, and with a sharp whistling sound, the sword light struck its giant head. Blood splattered everywhere, feathers fluttered in the air, and a giant eagle fell from the cliff. Tiange was about to breathe a sigh of relief, but her divine sense immediately sensed that the other 3 giant eagles rushed over together. "Watch out!" She shouted a warning, but Qianxi had just consumed a lot of spiritual aura, so he couldn't react in time. Almost out of instinct, Tiange activated the soul-refining art and lashed out. Ugh! She didn't know what the situation outside was like. She only felt pain from her divine sense being broken, and she spat out a mouthful of blood. Her whole body almost fell into a daze in an instant. Her divine sense was severed. It took her a long time to realize what had happened to her. "Behave. Don't move." Qianxi turned around and glared at her. But right at that moment, the 3 giant eagles she blocked attacked again. They flapped their 6 wings at the same time and pounced on him. Qianxi hastily raised his hand. The 3 Yang real fire sword blocked the attack from the front, but it didn't block the one behind him. After several attacks just now, the already shaky defensive cover cracked as soon as it came into contact with the eagle's wings. The eagle's claws pierced his back, causing a string of blood to blossom. His body swayed, and blood immediately gushed out of his back. Qianxi clenched his teeth, but he didn't care. He took out a defensive talisman from his waist and patted it on his body, forming a defensive cover again. Tiange only saw that he was injured, but she couldn't see the situation outside. Without thinking too much, she unfolded the white silk handkerchief and wrapped it around his whole body. This time, he finally didn't refuse her help. He had seen the power of this defensive magic weapon with his own eyes. Although it couldn't block all attacks, it could at least relieve a lot of pressure on him. Nevertheless, he still said, "If you consume too much spiritual aura, take it back." Tiange was stunned for a moment before she answered in a low voice. In her heart, she had already made up her mind. She couldn't do too many things here, but this was the only thing she could do. With the protection of the white silk handkerchief, Qianxi finally felt a bit more relaxed. However, he couldn't take care of the injury on his back, which kept bleeding. There were a lot of wandering restrictions in this place, and spiritual aura and devil aura were intertwining. For fear of causing the restrictions to collapse, he didn't dare to use other magic weapons and could only use the sword formation to fight against the double-headed eagle with his exquisite control of sword aura. He couldn't hold on for too long like this. This thought flashed across his mind. Not to mention the restrictions and gales, if the devil aura drifted over like before, it would be more than enough for him to bear. He turned his head to look at Tiange inside the cave. The 3 giant eagles became even more indignant because of their companion's death, so they chased after him again. Qianxi sighed softly. He swung his hand, and the 3 Yang real fire sword once again turned into a red light that revolved around him. He closed his eyes and clasped his palms, completely ignoring the attacks of the 3 giant eagles. Because they saw their companion's death, these 3 giant eagles were full of hatred towards him, so their attacks became more and more crazy. The 3 spiritual auras heavily hit the defensive cover, and Tiange felt her meridians go numb. Even though the white silk handkerchief's defense was amazing, such a powerful attack consumed a lot of spiritual aura. She immediately swallowed a lot of high-grade restorative panaceas. Without pausing for long, the three giant eagles once again rammed into her. This time, Enchanting couldn't control the white silk handkerchief anymore. The mist condensed and turned back into the white silk handkerchief, no longer able to maintain its defensive shape. For the third time, Qin withstood the attacks of the three giant eagles. He was injured just now, and after so many spiritual aura collisions, the defensive sword formation on his body already had a gap. Even the spiritual light protecting him was shaking and on the verge of shattering. Now, after being rammed by the three giant eagles, he almost fell down. Enchanting was extremely anxious. She couldn't care about anything else and used the soul refining art again. These giant eagles probably grew up in this special environment. They weren't afraid of gales, restrictions, devil aura, or a mutated divine sense. When she used the soul refining art just now, although one of them was injured, she herself was seriously injured. However, she could see that Qin was casting some kind of spell, so she had to block it for him. Otherwise, he would probably be seriously injured before he could cast it. The three giant eagles rammed into her again. The outermost sword formation buzzed and bounced off some of the attacks, but they all broke apart. Then, they rammed into her divine sense. In an instant, Enchanting once again tasted the pain of her divine sense being torn apart. This kind of pain was more intense than any physical pain. It was as if her head had been ruthlessly knocked and her brain would burst in the next moment. Nevertheless, she managed to block this attack in the end. Nevertheless, she knew she wouldn't be able to take care of it next time. Not to mention the fact that she just advanced to the core formation realm, so she didn't have enough magic weapons and methods. Even if she had magic weapons, she still wouldn't dare to use them because he said if she used magic weapons here, it might cause the restrictions to collapse. The dizziness in her head slowly disappeared. She opened her eyes and saw a bright light outside. Qin's body was wrapped in a dazzling white light. She saw a white bead flashing in his dantian. Although she'd never seen it before, Enchanting knew it was definitely that Yang spiritual bead. The Yang spiritual aura surged, causing the Yin spiritual aura inside her body to become restless. Under the light of the Yang spiritual bead, the three giant eagles seemed to have no idea what it was. They glided in the air and didn't dare to approach for a while. Their demonic beast instincts told them that this was definitely a dangerous thing. Therefore, one of them screeched. The three giant eagles once again flapped their wings, wrapped in spiritual aura, and charged towards Qin together. Demonic beasts' attacks were this simple. They had innately sharp claws and teeth, and their bodies were like weapons. Such a simple attack was enough to give cultivators headaches. Spiritual aura converged, and the white light gently blocked the three giant eagles' attacks as if it didn't require any effort at all. Soon after, the white light spread and completely wrapped the three giant eagles. These eagles didn't know what was happening. They flapped their wings in the thick Yang spiritual aura, wanting to fly away. However, the Yang spiritual aura firmly wrapped them, making them unable to move. Gradually, they couldn't even flap their wings. The red sword light once again shone brightly, and the sword formation reformed. Amid the giant eagles' panicked cries, it slowly stabbed towards them. Puff, puff. They were pierced by the sword aura and fell down from the cliff. Senior Martial Brother. Enchanting's eyes and hands were quick. She grabbed Qin, who was about to fall, and pulled him in with difficulty. Chapter 282. After an unknown amount of time, Qin woke up from his coma. The narrow space and the dim light. There was a large mass of devil aura outside the cave. Fortunately, there was a layer of defense that blocked the devil aura outside. His body felt heavy. He looked down and saw Enchanting sitting motionlessly next to him. Her head was tilted and leaning against his body. Their palms were intertwined, making him feel cold and soft. His back was burning with pain. It was the wound caused by the giant eagle's tearing. But he also felt it was soft. He reached out to touch it. It turned out she put a shirt on it. What's going on? Why don't I feel like I'm hurt badly? Tianga, he called softly and pushed her. Tianga didn't move. He had a bad feeling. He reached out to feel her pulse and was stunned. Her meridians were empty. He suddenly realized what had happened and immediately moved the spiritual aura in his body. Sure enough, his dantian and meridians were intact, and his spiritual aura was also abundant. The only difference was that there was a lot of Yin spiritual aura in the depths of his dantian, mixing with the neutral aura. After a while, Qin Shi regained his composure. Almost every time he used the Yang spiritual bead, his body would become extremely weak and he would need a very long time to recover. Therefore, he rarely used the Yang spiritual bead because he didn't have complete preparations. After using it, his life would be in danger. But this time, because of her, he didn't even suffer any internal injuries. She was now in the core formation realm. Even if the spiritual aura difference between the early stage and the peak stage of the core formation realm was huge, the spiritual aura in her body was enough to heal him. Therefore, his dantian and meridians were able to recover in a short time. After sitting in a daze for a long time, he slowly recovered. The cave was very small. Sitting side by side, they could barely move. In order to heal him, she almost curled up into a ball. But even if she wasn't tall and thin, it was still very difficult for her to hold such a position. He thought for a moment, laid her flat, and turned sideways to try to heal her. The wound on his back would hurt if he moved it, so he endured it. But he couldn't finish it. Although he wasn't strong, he was much taller. Not to mention sitting up, it was difficult for him to even turn around. After a long time, he could only lean forward and barely hover over her. When he was about to transfer spiritual aura to her, he suddenly realized that he looked like he was taking advantage of her. After realizing this, his face became a bit hot and he couldn't of it. Of course, he couldn't do it anymore. After thinking for a while, he could only sit back and put his right palm on her Lingtai acupoint, slowly transferring spiritual aura. The best acupoints to transfer spiritual aura were the Shanzhong acupoint on the chest and the Lingtai acupoint on the back. Of the Lingtai acupoint on of her back. Of energy. The moment the acupoint of spiritual aura acupoint of Lin of was. Of spiritual energy of yin of yang of the five elements. Of energy circulated of energy. Of spiritual energy. Spiritual energy of spiritual energy of energy of energy of her. Of her. However, this kind of uncontrollable flow was extremely smooth. When his yang spiritual aura entered her body, Yin spiritual aura almost immediately gathered in her meridians. The five elements of Yin and Yang circulated endlessly. He knew her divine sense was injured, but he was powerless to do anything about it. He had never heard that divine sense could be used to heal injuries. It could only be slowly nurtured in one's sea of knowledge. He shook his head, stopped transferring spiritual aura, and continued to sit side by side. But on second thought, he felt this wasn't good. He took out a piece of clothing from his chinkuan bag and put it on her back. But on second thought, he felt this wasn't good, so he took out a piece of clothing from his chinkuan bag and put it on her back. The stones around them were very hard, so it should be more comfortable. The pain on his back became more severe. He knew he had lost a lot of blood, but this place was too narrow. He couldn't even take off his clothes in such a small space, let alone treat as wound. Thinking about it, he could only give up. In any case, for cultivators, it was only a small injury and wouldn't kill them. But because he lost a lot of blood, experienced a thrilling battle, and lost a lot of spiritual aura just now, his mind couldn't help but become muddled. Soon, he fell asleep again. Mo Tiange opened her eyes. She felt warm all over, almost making her want to stretch. But before she could do that, her head bumped into something. She screamed in pain and was about to cover her aching head when she heard a very gentle voice. "What's wrong?" Then a pair of hands wrapped around her, lifted her head, looked at her, and scolded, "How could you be so careless? Do you have any self-awareness as a cultivator? You're in a daze." She didn't wake up, so of course she was in a daze. She didn't say this because she felt the current situation was very strange. In fact, she wasn't in a daze very often. Most of the time, she was very sober and calm. Why did he always see her when she was in a daze? Her mind was in a mess. She shook her head to get rid of these inexplicable thoughts. Mo Tiange's eyes shifted as she recalled what happened before. They were attacked by a giant eagle on the cliff and were injured, so they stayed in this place to heal their injuries. But what's with his current attitude? "Senior Martial Brother Shoujing?" she asked in a low voice. "What?" His voice sounded a bit unhappy, but his face didn't show it. Then he asked, "How are your injuries? Have you recovered your spiritual aura?" Spiritual aura. She immediately tried to circulate her spiritual aura, but she was stunned. She was a bit nervous when he saw her appearance. "Is there a problem?" Mo Tiange shook her head, still in a daze. No. Not only was there no problem, but she had never felt so good. Originally, there was only a small amount of Yang's spiritual aura in her body, but now, it almost formed a cycle around her gold core. No matter how stupid she was, she knew what happened. She transferred her spiritual aura to him to heal his injuries, and after he recovered, he transferred it back to her. Not only was there no loss of spiritual aura, but it also triggered the spiritual aura cycle in their bodies. She suddenly understood why her master was so keen on matchmaking them. It wasn't because he wanted to be a matchmaker, but because their cultivation techniques and their spiritual aura attributes would definitely complement each other if they performed dual cultivation. However, when she realized this, she felt very unhappy. Was it just because their dual cultivation was beneficial to each other? Your dantian and meridians are fine, but what about your divine sense? Hearing his question, she felt a headache again. She supported her head with her hand and shook her head. "My divine sense was injured a bit badly." She nodded. He wasn't surprised at all. He said, "Although the soul refining art is a good technique for winning by surprise, its shortcomings are also very fatal. You have to be careful when using it in the future." And she answered softly. In the past, when she used the soul refining art, she could even defeat those stronger than her. But this time, because of the special environment in which these giant eagles grew, she was the one who was injured. Now, her body was completely fine, but the injury to her divine sense would take at least several years to recover. "By the way, Senior Martial Brother, how are your injuries?" He nodded and said with a smile, "I'm fine. I have to thank you, it's nothing." The two of them weren't used to polite words of thanks, so they stopped talking. Mo Tiange felt like she forgot something. After thinking for a while, she suddenly remembered when she saw the bloodstains on his clothes. "By the way, Senior Martial Brother, the injury on your back." She reached out, wanting to push him away from the rock wall and look at it. She struggled, but he was unwilling to move. He just smiled and said, "It's nothing." How could it be nothing? Mo Tiange ignored him and continued to push him. There's so much blood, and you can't handle it yourself. Don't worry, I'll be very gentle. No. Before he could finish, Mo Tiange persistently interrupted him. Senior martial brother. Seeing her raised eyebrows, he couldn't say anything and could only go along with her. Mo Tiange pushed him, making him sit with his back facing her. Sure enough, the wound was badly mutilated. She frowned and tried to tear the clothes on his back, but Xianqing School's clothes were spirit tools or magic tools, so it was very difficult to tear them. She had no choice but to reach out to untie his belt. This movement was very natural, so Mo Tiange didn't feel anything was wrong. Qin Shi, on the other hand, stiffened. He felt her hand going around his waist from behind, feeling around his waist, trying to untie his belt. However, their clothes had long been tangled together, so she couldn't untie them no matter how hard she tried. After a while, she stretched her head, wanting to see what was going on, but in the next moment, her hand was pressed down. What? Before she could finish her words, she suddenly stopped. This doesn't seem right. His hand was pressing down on her. To understand the relationship between the belt and her waist, she wrapped her arms around his waist. With this press, her whole body was pressed against his back. Silence. Breathing. In this narrow space, they could only hear each other's breathing and heartbeats. The howling gales outside couldn't pass through the gap, making it seem distant and unreal. Only the two of them could be seen. Mo Tiange felt her hand was very hot. The place she pressed against his waist was very hot, and the back of her hand covered by his hand was also very hot. She felt this was wrong and wanted to pull her hand back, but his grip became tighter and tighter. Tiange. After a long time, she heard Qin Shi's voice. His voice was trembling, but it carried a water-like gentleness that she had never heard before. Her heart beat wildly. She wanted to wait for something, but she also felt she couldn't wait any longer and wanted to escape. Should I answer? She thought like this, but she couldn't even find her own voice. Qin Shi finally moved. He separated her hands but didn't let go. Then, with the friction of their clothes, he gently turned around. This place was too narrow, and the places he could turn were very limited. Therefore, after he turned around, he was almost pressed against her body. Mo Tiange felt she couldn't breathe. She struggled to step back, wanting to be a bit farther away. But in the next moment, he still leaned against her. He finally let go of her hand, but he wrapped his arms around her waist. There was nowhere to retreat, a cold kiss. It happened so suddenly and so naturally. Her eyes were wide open as if she couldn't believe what had happened. Their faces were so close, and their breaths were intertwined. And the cold and soft touch on her lips. It was a completely unfamiliar feeling. She must be dreaming. She must be. But her eyes opened wider and wider until she heard his helpless sigh. Then, her eyes were covered. From her lips to her breath, everything became hot. Chapter 283. She must be dreaming. Maybe when she woke up, she'd find that she fell asleep cultivating in the virtual sky world. But could she fall asleep while cultivating? As a core formation cultivator, could she fall asleep while cultivating? Then it must be an illusion. It must be an illusion. She hypnotized herself for a long time, but when she opened her eyes, she still saw the rock wall and that face. She wasn't dreaming. She pushed the person next to her away, ignoring the sound of him hitting the rock wall. In any case, a core formation cultivator wouldn't die even if he hit the rock wall. She picked up the things around her, wanting to throw them at him, but there was nothing around her. Where could she find anything? She put her hand into her Qianquan bag and smashed whatever she touched. Tiange. She didn't stop. She still picked up things and smashed them mindlessly. If she didn't smash them, she wouldn't be able to bear it in the next moment. Oh! A low cry of pain entered her ears. She finally stopped, gasping for breath as she stared at the person who was so close to her no matter how she pushed. Seeing that she stopped, she put down the sleeve covering his face and said helplessly, "I hit my wound." Tiange calmed down and remembered the bloody and untreated wound on his back. With a cold expression, she said, "Turn around." He paused for a moment. His clothes rubbed against each other, so he obediently turned around. "Take off your clothes." Although he knew she meant he should take off his clothes to heal his wound, she still couldn't help but let his imagination run wild. He then untied his belt and took off his robe. Behind him, Tiange very rudely took off his robe and looked at his wound under the dim sky. That giant eagle's claws were very sharp, so the wound on his back was very deep. Since he hit the rock wall just now, the blood that had already coagulated started to seep out again. Tiange put her hand into her chinkuan bag, but she couldn't find what she wanted no matter how hard she searched. Remembering that she lost a lot of medicinal pill bottles, she could only lower her head and search around. With great difficulty, she finally found a jade bottle. She pulled out the cork, poured the cold medicinal liquid into her palm, and directly patted it on his wound with a vengeful heart. He didn't cry out, but the muscles near the wound trembled, allowing her to enjoy the pleasure of revenge. This revenge made his mood much better. Next, he carefully cleaned his wound with medicinal liquid, sprinkled some medicinal powder, and cast a small healing spell to make the wound not look so terrible. Finally, he used a small flying sword to cut off the clothes he had taken off and used it to bandage the wound. After doing all this, Tiange once again felt something was amiss. In a narrow space with a half-naked man beside her, and not long ago, this man had done such a thing to her. So she thought for a moment and said, "Put on your clothes." He touched his nose, turned sideways, and said innocently, "You tore my clothes." Tiange was dumbfounded. She couldn't help but feel angry again. However, when she recalled his wound, she forcefully swallowed her anger and said angrily in a low voice, "Do you only have this one set of clothes?" Of course it was impossible. They weren't mortals. If a chinkuan bag could store so many things, couldn't it store a few clothes? He had no choice but to take out his clothes from his chinkuan bag, then said, "But I can't wear it with you tied up like this." Tiange glared at him. "Give it to me." She took his clothes and roughly helped him put them on. His naked skin was unconsciously brushed against. At first, her heart was filled with a nameless fire. Her heart was filled with anger, but in the end, it turned into awkwardness. She had lived for more than 80 years. Among mortals, her current age would make her an old lady. However, she was a cultivator who immersed herself in cultivation and had never experienced such a thing. She recalled the past 80 years. Only when she was young did she often see boys swimming in the river by the village, but those were all children. Fortunately, this process didn't take long. She quickly put on his clothes and finally fastened the belt. "Done," she said, and was about to retreat. But in the next moment, someone grabbed her waist. She couldn't kneel anymore and fell forward, falling into his arms. She struggled to get up, but his arms tightened, making it impossible for her to struggle. He was a head taller than her, so she couldn't even struggle to free her head from his embrace. Her whole body was submerged in his embrace. Her anger, which had already faded, flared up again, so she opened her mouth and fiercely bit his chest. This kind of bite only made him groan, so she couldn't bite anymore and let go of him. The tears she originally thought would never come fell little by little. What the hell is going on? What does he want to do? He's so cold to me one moment, but he's like this the next. He's always so good that she can't help but misunderstand, but his words can make people freeze. One moment, he's Qin Shi, the next moment, he's Qin Shoujing. She clearly recognized him as Qin Shoujing and buried her feelings for Qin Shi in the depths of her heart, but as Qin Shoujing, Qin Shoujing, what do you want? She wiped away her tears little by little and asked calmly, didn't you say you don't covet anything from me? What are you doing now? He was silent for a long time, but he didn't let go of her. After a while, he said slowly, I want to ask you, what do you mean by that? He clasped her waist and lifted her up, not allowing her to escape even for a moment. Am I Qin Shi or Qin Shoujing? What's the difference in meaning? Why don't you say it? He asked. I ended my closed-door meditation for you, went out to find medicine for you, and in the end, I almost lost half my life. Why do you say that to me? Not answering. He pressed his lips against hers and bit her, bit by bit, as if he was kissing and biting. Then he shouted between her teeth, what do I want? Why don't you ask me what you want? This time, he didn't let her answer. Her waist was tightly held by him, and it wasn't a gentle kiss like before. Instead, it was close to biting and devouring. He never knew he was such a violent person, but at this moment, his heart was filled with the desire to destroy her. He didn't want her to escape, didn't want her to say those hurtful words, and didn't want to see her distant eyes. He trapped her by his side, making her unable to move and unable to hurt him with her seemingly unintentional but indifferent eyes. Normally, the sex robes couldn't be torn, but she didn't know what kind of technique he used, but it was almost completely torn. In this narrow space, she couldn't even struggle, let alone he was holding her waist so hard and wrapping her wrists. His ice-cold hands went under the hem of the robe, slid all the way, and finally grasped her smooth skin, bringing her uneasy pain. But she couldn't say anything. His kiss never stopped. Their breathing was messy. The narrow space brought about a cramped depression. The sudden passion burned them like fire and drowned them like water. Tianget struggled to float up from the water. Although this kind of feeling was intoxicating, she instinctively felt that she should stop. Because of that, she finally managed to free her hand and ruthlessly swung it, hitting his face with a paw. There was silence. Let me go, she said in a suppressed voice. She was silent for a long time, but in the end, he let go. I'm sorry. His apology made Tianga unable to restrain herself. She suddenly grabbed his collar and tightly restrained him. What are you sorry for? What do you think you have to apologize for? I apologize for my behavior. His voice finally regained its calmness, but then he said, but what I said wasn't false. I don't need to apologize for it. He continued, I really don't understand what kind of woman you are. You're usually like a man and refuse to admit defeat, but you're timid in the face of love. You're always doing hurtful things and saying hurtful things. I also don't know what kind of man you are. One moment you say this, and the next moment you do that. His words ignited her anger, and Tianga almost couldn't control her temper. You said you did it for me. But for more than 30 years, you avoided me and never thought about confessing your identity to me. Even if I knew, you didn't give me any explanation. Yes, I knew you were Qin Shoujing, and I didn't care about deceiving you, but you didn't say anything. Did you think it was natural? Did you think you didn't need to explain it all? Don't say it. She shouted, pushed him back, and continued to grab onto his collar. Back then, you clearly knew that I had feelings for senior brother Qin, so you kept your distance. I'm not an idiot, so I didn't have any delusions either. I'm also a cultivator, and I also want to walk the great Tao of immortality. I can control and endure feelings, but you're always changing. When you're good, you treat me very well, but after a while, you avoid me. During the demonic beast riot, you came to save me. Do you know how touched I was? I think you have a little bit of feelings for me, don't you? Can I look forward to it? But as soon as we came out, you treated me like that. Yes, I know my cultivation level is much lower than yours, and I'm just a small cultivator to you. I'm not even worth a glance from you. But if you look down on me, why are you so considerate, so gentle? She lowered her head, controlling her trembling lips so that he wouldn't see it. I guessed you were Chin Shojing. I know I'm being paranoid, but I also know that if you had any bad intentions, you didn't have to treat me like that. So I told myself maybe you had your reasons. Since you didn't say anything, I would still treat you as senior martial brother Chin and treat you like before. But in the end, after the demonic beast riot ended, I came back alive. It was so difficult to see you again, but you pretended you didn't see me. You looked down on me. I didn't look down on you. I never said, but your attitude was like that. She shouted at him in an even louder voice. You watched me walk towards you, but you didn't even look at me. You just turned around and walked away. Yes, my cultivation level is very low. Is it very shameful for me to become your junior martial sister? But in the beginning, you were the one who made Master accept me as a disciple. No, don't deny it. She said loudly, even somewhat hysterically. At that time, I understood. You're not senior martial brother Chin. You're Chin Shojing. I'm indebted to you, but you're separated from me by tens of thousands of mountains and rivers. You're a high and aloof senior. You said I hurt you. Chin Shojing, Daoist Master Shojing, Senior Martial Brother Shojing, on what basis do you think you can turn around and walk away when you don't like me? But after you've done what you want, you can turn around and look at me. I'd like to ask you, what do you think I am? One moment you're cold and heartless, the next you're filled with tenderness. At that time, you turned around and walked away, avoiding me for 35 years. What do you want me to think? I don't want to think I'm sentimental anymore. Chapter 284. It was just a turn of his back, but it turned out that it hurt her so much. He never thought about it. Perhaps even she herself never thought about it. She was Chin Shojing. When she realized this, she tried to accept it, but he used an indifferent attitude to reject her approach. Therefore, she firmly believed that Chin Shojing wasn't Chin Shi. But this inference was completely wrong. Why did he do that back then? Because he had a little bit of a good impression of her, but his self-esteem was hurt by those two deification cultivators. He rejected her approach because his pointless self-esteem was hurt, and also because, at that time, he didn't have that many feelings for her. That's because, this time, she gave him time, but he couldn't say it. Because at that time, they didn't have such deep feelings for each other. Even if this was the truth, if he said it out loud, there really wouldn't be any hope left. Apart from this, what else could he say? He wasn't a liar, and he definitely wasn't a person who spoke sweet words. He was clumsy with his words, and the words he said were always true. He only did something like deceiving someone once, and it was only that one time. Now, he already paid the price for it. For a long time, Chin Shi didn't answer, so her expression gradually turned into a sneer. Can't say it. He turned his head, not knowing how to face her gaze. You're always like this, you give me the wrong impression, then back away, leaving me to struggle in the whirlpool alone. When I climb up, you want to pull me down again. I've formed my gold core, so I'm indifferent to it. If you ignore me, my feelings will probably slowly die. But why do you still have to provoke me? Chin Shojing, you just know I love you. When she shouted these words, even she herself didn't realize how wrong she was. In this life, she lost too many things, so she wasn't afraid to lose them. However, she hated this feeling of not being able to have them and not being able to let them go. When she formed her gold core, she calmly dealt with this feeling. If it weren't for his faintly discernible teasing during this period of time, maybe after a few more years, this feeling would have really disappeared. But he didn't let her go. Along the way, he seemed to be both affectionate and heartless. One moment he was too nice to her, and the next moment he was cold. He didn't seduce her as openly as Jing Xingji did. If he did, perhaps her remaining feelings for him would have disappeared without a trace. He just stood at a distance that seemed to be far, yet close at the same time. She couldn't get close to him, couldn't leave him, and couldn't bear to part with him. Can't say it. Mo Tiange calmed down and stopped him just as he was about to speak. The emotions that had been accumulating for several decades were vented out, but there was no response. She raised her head and looked at him with a bit of arrogance. Then there's no need to say anything else. I've reached the core formation realm, and I'll continue on my path to the nascent soul realm. Today's matter ends here. I don't want to hear any more excuses. Please keep your distance from me. No. How could he stop now? Especially after what she said. Tiange, she couldn't retreat any further, so she could only turn her back to him. If she couldn't see his face, perhaps she wouldn't be soft-hearted anymore. But his arms wrapped around her from behind. The gap was so narrow that she couldn't break free at all. His breath was right next to her ear, carrying uncontrollable excitement. How can I keep my distance from you? You said you loved me, so what? She sneered. Didn't you already know? I didn't know. He forcibly turned her body around. I knew you had a good impression of the former senior martial brother Qin, but I didn't know how deep your feelings were. I thought. He was so excited that he was a bit incoherent. Since you can form your gold core, you're definitely no longer, at least not that much. After saying a bunch of nonsense, he became serious again and asked seriously, why can you form your gold core? Mo Tiange was stunned. She was furious. What do you mean, why can I form my gold core? Are you going to be happy if I can't form my gold core? Of course not. She was so anxious that he didn't know what to say. But, I can't form my nascent soul. I thought of a lot of methods, medicinal pills, mental cultivation, even letting Master use a secret technique to enter my sea of knowledge, but I always failed on the verge of success. It doesn't make sense that you can. What does it have to do with me that you can't form your nascent soul? She became even angrier. Let go. No. I'd be an idiot if I still let go after you said so. Master will definitely beat me to death if he finds out. Wait a minute. He calmed down a bit. Let me think about what to say. No matter how he thought about it, he still didn't know what to say. Therefore, in the end, she gave up. Forget it. I'll start from the beginning. From now on, you're not allowed to speak. Why should I? Mo Tiange angrily opened her mouth to bite him, but she didn't give her a chance. He clasped her chin and bit her tongue to stop her from speaking. After a long time, he finally ended this entanglement. Her breathing was unstable. She finally managed to catch her breath. He stopped her between her teeth. I told you, from now on, you're not allowed to speak. If you want to speak, then neither of us needs to say anything. Mo Tiange felt something was wrong. Why did it seem like she was being led by the nose by him? But if she didn't listen to him, it seemed like she couldn't. Seeing her confused expression, she couldn't help but laugh. He combed her messy long hair and said softly, listen to me, okay? She hesitated for a while but eventually acquiesced. It seemed she had no choice but to acquiesce. I admit, in the beginning, I didn't have any feelings for you. I just thought it was good to be Qin Shi and get along with you. At that time, if I became Qin Shoujing again, you'd definitely stay away from me. Besides, you're so paranoid. If it was Qin Shoujing who saved you, would you still be so close to me? Mo Tiange didn't answer, but he got the answer from her expression. Qin Shi smiled. You seem to always be afraid of power that surpasses your own. Maybe it's because it makes you feel unsafe. I can understand that guarding that kind of secret requires you to be careful in every aspect, but this kind of vigilance will make you reject all kinds of power you can't control. If I were Qin Shoujing, you definitely wouldn't trust me. Even if I saved you and took you back to Xianqing School, it would still be very difficult for you to have a sense of belonging to Xianqing School, right? Mo Tiange really wanted to refute him, but what he said seemed to be right. The first person she trusted was senior martial brother Qin, so when she came to Xianqing School, she slowly accepted this kind of life and found it wasn't that hard to trust the people around her. Even though she was disappointed in senior martial brother Qin later, Luo Fengxue, Yi Jingwen, martial uncle Xianin, her master. These people made her feel that trust wasn't that scary. Senior martial brother Qin wasn't the whole reason, but he was the first reason. Of course, it was because I also liked this kind of feeling. I felt that in front of you, being a little cultivator in the same realm as me was much easier. I could say some things and do some things without any scruples. At that time, she really felt that he was sincere and frank. He didn't hide anything, was frank, fair, and clean, but then there was the demonic beast riot, Qin Shi said. I don't know how to explain this matter to you, but I can tell you that I wasn't in a good mood at that time because I wasn't targeting you. He wasn't targeting me, but he still had that dead face. Mo Tiange said angrily, hey. I told you. You're not allowed to talk about it now. Mo Tiange shut her mouth even more angrily. Maybe you don't know something happened. He took a deep breath. For the first time, he planned to tell her about this matter. Did you notice that I was seriously injured when I came out of the 2Dification Senior's virtual sky world? Mo Tiange thought about it and nodded. Although he didn't say it explicitly, she could see it with her eyes. Qin Shi smiled, somewhat self-deprecatingly. In fact, it was because inside the virtual sky world, that Senior Yuan Bao said I had a young spiritual bead and was suitable to practice his cultivation technique, so he tortured me. Faced with Mo Tiange's questioning gaze, he had no choice but to tell her the truth. He made me eat a lot of strange things and used a lot of inexplicable methods, almost torturing me until I was half dead. It was precisely because of this that I was seriously injured. He said it was to transform my body, to make me infinitely close to a pure yang constitution, so I could become your human furnace. By the end, he was almost silent. Mo Tiange widened her eyes and finally spoke. Human furnace. His face turned slightly red and he looked away. He said although I wasn't born with a pure yang constitution, I have metal and fire spiritual roots, both of which are of the yang attribute. I also fused with the yang spiritual bead. After his transformation, as long as I slowly cultivate his pure yang technique, I'll become the same as a pure yang constitution. In that case, being your human furnace can help you cultivate faster. Mo Tiange kept staring at him, almost not daring to believe what she heard. Human furnace. She had always been afraid that she would be forced to become a human furnace because of her constitution. In the end, he was also afraid to become her human furnace. This. What was this? He felt very uncomfortable under her gaze. I admit. Senior Yuan Bao's words were too much of a blow to me, so as soon as I came out, I was in a hurry to go back to heal my injuries and enter closed-door meditation so I could advance to the nascent soul realm as soon as possible. Because of this, I also vented my anger on you. Mo Tiange was speechless for a long time. She originally thought she would still feel angry no matter what reason he gave, but this reason was too ridiculous. It was so ridiculous that she couldn't even speak and didn't even have the strength to get angry. Tiange, he said nervously, Are you laughing at me? After being silent for a long time, she nodded expressionlessly. Yes, I'm laughing at you. Sure enough. He sighed and laughed at himself. I know it's ridiculous, but I don't think you understand how humiliating this is for me. I don't understand, she said. In the next moment, she grabbed his collar and gnashed her teeth. But I know you've been deceived. Chapter 285. She was dumbfounded and grabbed her hand. What do you mean I was deceived? Mo Tiange sneered. Two disrespectful old men. When they left, they didn't want to see me again. What human furnace are you talking about? How is that possible? If those two old men weren't going to come back, it was impossible for them to capture him as a human furnace for Mo Tiange. She was completely petrified when he realized this. What? What was he doing all these years? Are you sure? He was doubtful. They really weren't going to come back. I'm sure, absolutely sure. Mo Tiange said angrily, at that time, I just built my foundation. Deification cultivators like them can casually enter closed-door meditation for thousands of years. Who knows if I'll still be alive when they come back? Only an idiot like you would believe that. She thought about it and felt something was wrong. But, if that's the case, why did they have to transform my body? Mo Tiange continued to sneer. They're deification cultivators. Can't they play with little cultivators because they're bored? How dare you say I'm paranoid? They gave you benefits and deceived you. Fine, he was successfully deceived. Moreover, he was deceived for dozens of years and suffered for dozens of years. If those two old men knew this, they'd definitely be very proud. After thousands of years in the deification realm, did they go crazy from boredom? They obviously gave him benefits, but they acted like they were scheming against him. They didn't want his gratitude but wanted to make him feel disgusted. He wasted dozens of years on this kind of thing. What on earth was he doing? After figuring this out, both of them were silent. One was speechless, and the other was gnashing her teeth. After a long time, she heard Shi's voice. Tiange. What? She asked fiercely. You, cough. You what? You don't know how to say something. She didn't say anything. Instead, he reached out to grab a casually thrown underwear, put it on her, and carefully wrapped it up. At first, Mo Tiange didn't know what he was doing, but as she watched his movements, she suddenly realized that her clothes were disheveled. The front of her robe was torn and her undergarments were faintly discernible. She immediately swatted his hand away, then wrapped herself up and curled up into a ball. He didn't know if this feeling was called wanting more, but he was sure he was very disappointed. If he knew this, he wouldn't have reminded her. What are you looking at? He smiled as he leaned closer and whispered, You're blushing. Mo Tiange was stunned. She grabbed her robe with one hand and randomly fumbled for something with her other hand before throwing it at him again. Tiange. Even if he was a cultivator and couldn't smash people to death, but she was too violent. Why didn't he realize she was such a person in the past? She couldn't bear it anymore. He grabbed her hands and firmly pressed her against his chest. Don't move. Do you want to smash me to death? I'd rather smash you to death. Mo Tiange struggled. If you think it's too troublesome, then die for me to see. You. This was simply unreasonable. Me what? Qin Shoujing, let go of me. You've gone too far today. Fine, it was a little too much, but if he hadn't confirmed her feelings, he wouldn't have. Are you going to let go or not? Unable to break free, she became more and more angry and pushed him away. She did manage to push him away, but he was pushed to the rock wall by her. He immediately let out a muffled groan and froze. She struggled out of his embrace. Seeing his sweaty appearance, she couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong?" After a long time, he finally showed a bleak smile. He wanted to raise his hand but couldn't, so he could only frown and say, "My back." His back was injured. Thinking of this, Emotianga felt a bit regretful, but it was already too late. She could only ask, "Can you move?" He shook his head. "Wait a minute." He waited for a while with cold sweat all over his body. When the pain seemed to have subsided a bit, he finally moved his body and turned his back. Emotianga's heart trembled when she saw the back of his newly changed robe was bloody again. She then looked at the rock wall, which was also stained with a lot of blood. It was obvious that her push just now had caused his wound to split open. "Take off your clothes," she said after a while. Qin Shi obediently went to untie his belt, but his hands trembled for a long time and still couldn't lift them. He could only look at her helplessly and say, "It hurts too much. Even moving my hand hurts." After pausing for a while, Emotianga moved forward and lowered her head to untie his belt. This time, it was much smoother, but it was even more embarrassing. At that time, she only thought about treating his injury and didn't think about anything else. Now, she kissed him and hugged him. She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at his face. She only breathed a sigh of relief when she took off his clothes and didn't worry that he would see her face. Then she concentrated on treating his wound again. She untied his belt and sure enough, his wound ruptured. She treated it as before and continued to help him change his clothes. During the whole process, she kept her head down and didn't say a word. When everything was done, she pretended that nothing had happened and started to clean up the medicine bottles she threw everywhere in the cave. Ahem. He was restless and wanted to attract her attention. "What are you doing? If you still want your injury to get better, behave." "I didn't." He said 2 words and then pulled her hand in a flattering manner. "I haven't finished talking yet. What else do you want to say?" He didn't know where to start since he was interrupted. He hesitated for a long time and finally said, "In short, those 35 years. I just couldn't figure it out, so, later on, you finally came back and entered the 10,000 laws of nature formation, but in the end, you injured your sea of consciousness. Only then did I realize that no matter what those 2 soul formation seniors said, my feelings for you always existed." "Feelings?" Emotianga looked at him suspiciously. "Do you have feelings for me? Why would you suspect that I don't have feelings for you?" Qin Shi was startled and asked back. "How would I know you have feelings for me?" Emotianga was even more baffled. "Did you tell me?" "Did I?" "Fine, no. But I've made it very obvious, okay?" "Obvious? Where?" I ended my closed-door meditation because I sensed something happened to you. Then, in order to wake you up quickly, I went out to look for medicine. I also brought you to Demonic Mountain. If it was someone else, I wouldn't have cared." "What's with that expression?" "The expression that says you're an idiot." Emotianga couldn't stand it anymore. Regardless of whether his wound was just bandaged or not, she slapped his hand away. "Yes, the things you do always make me feel like you have feelings for me. But just as I thought that, you looked at me coldly and hinted that I shouldn't think too highly of myself." She was tongue-tied. I didn't mean that. Tiange continued to sneer. I don't care whether you did or not. That's what you meant. She still hadn't calmed down. She was being unreasonable. He took a deep breath and said, Fine, I'll tell you now. You misunderstood me. I actually think about you every day. I think about you even in my dreams. I miss you so much that I'm crazy. Do you understand now? What do you mean by not saying anything? She was anxious. He had never said this kind of thing in his life, and he didn't plan to say it again. Are you going back on your words again? What do you mean again? Tiange finally spoke. Aren't you? She'd said with some confusion, in the beginning, I indeed sensed that you had developed different feelings for me. But at that time, I thought you were a smart person who knew how to control yourself, so I didn't say anything. Later, I figured it out and came out of closed-door meditation, but you coldly turned around and left. Master told me you needed time to accept it, so I didn't disturb you and just thought of a way to form my nascent soul. But more than 10 years passed, and you still didn't look for me. Right after that, you formed your gold core. If you really had feelings for me, why could you form your gold core? Say something. Tiange resisted the urge to slap him again. She clenched her teeth and said, Why couldn't I form my gold core? If you didn't say anything, how would I know you really did it for me? Maybe it was just because my father entrusted you to go out and look for medicine for me, but you just didn't expect the consequences to be so serious. She was speechless. He didn't say anything because he thought his actions were enough to make her understand. Unfortunately, she was afraid of misunderstanding and didn't dare to think highly of herself, so she never understood. After a long time, he continued to ask, What about you? What were you thinking? What could I think? If you didn't want it, I didn't dare to force you. You wholeheartedly wanted to form your nascent soul, so why should I be so stubborn? I couldn't form my nascent soul because of you, but you didn't dare to force me. She couldn't help but question her. How would I know? Tiange lowered her head. Although she didn't want to admit defeat, her tone was weak. You never told me either. She said, You even called me an idiot. You're not that smart. If you didn't refuse to say anything, I would have thought you already had no feelings for me. You said I didn't say anything, but not only did you say nothing, but you also didn't ask anything. Tiange's anger flared again, but he was injured, so she could only turn her anger into words. Why do I have to say everything and ask everything? You're a fickle and messy person, yet you still want me to understand everything. I'm not so smart that I can see what's going on in your head. You're unreasonable. You're the unreasonable one. The two of them glared at each other. In any case, they both thought the other was wrong. After glaring at her for a while, she was the first to give in. He gently pulled her sleeve and said softly, Fine, if you say so, then so be it. Do you understand now? Humph. He smiled fawningly and moved forward to hug her, but he was slapped away. Then, he unyieldingly pulled her arm again. I'm an idiot, and you're an idiot with me. In short, we're two idiots. Isn't this fair? Oh, if you don't say anything, I'll take it that you're not angry anymore. I'm not an idiot. Fine, you're not. But we've wasted a lot of time. From now on, let's not waste any more, okay? If you don't say anything, I'll take it that you agree. I didn't. He swallowed the rest of his words, so he smiled cheerfully. You really agreed. Chapter 286. After being forced to agree, Tiange found that the person who was half dead a moment ago was suddenly full of vigor. This cave was so narrow that they couldn't even lie down, so he took out his flying sword and cut a large piece of the rock wall, at least enough for the two of them to lie down. Emo Tiango was dumbfounded. She put the stone he cut into his chinkuan bag and noticed her gaze. What's wrong? So these stones can be cut. He touched his nose and avoided her gaze. This. Although the material is quite special, my sword isn't an ordinary sword, then why didn't you do it yesterday? The two of them squeezed in such a small place and couldn't move, so he took advantage of her a lot. It wasn't necessary. She looked innocent. I just wanted to rest for a while. Was there a need to open an immortal's cave? Both of us are injured now, so we have to rest here for a few days. That's why I wanted to make it more comfortable. Emo Tiange swallowed her anger. You swear you didn't do it on purpose? Of course not, he said righteously. Think about it. Back then, your father and I, two men, didn't waste our strength even when we were squeezed in here. These stones in Demonic Mountain aren't ordinary things. Look, I cut them and even wanted to take them out. These can at least be used to refine tools. Why did she feel like something was wrong? She felt like she was being fooled. All right, don't think too much, she said, quickly put your things away. You have to change your habit of smashing people. Perhaps she had been repressed for too long. If she wanted to vent her emotions, she could just slap him, but why did she like smashing people? You really have a lot of demands. I'm doing it for my own safety. She changed her words halfway. You really have a lot of medicinal pills. Most of the things he picked up were jade bottles. He opened them and smelled them. They were all medicinal pills. However, he felt something was wrong. The quality of these medicinal pills was too good. Even with his pill concocting skills, he didn't think he could concoct them. He remembered the medicinal pill he got from Yi Jinji and gave to Xiaohua. Just as he thought about it, the medicinal pill in his hand was immediately taken away by Emo Tiange. She plugged the bottle and put it into her chinkuan bag. She didn't say, so he didn't ask. It was impossible for the two of them to have no secrets. Besides, they weren't in that kind of relationship yet. Silently, he collected his things. After a while, Emo Tiange was the first to break the silence. She suddenly asked, why did your attitude suddenly change today? Didn't you say that you don't think I have feelings for you anymore? Upon hearing this, she just smiled. Emo Tiange's curiosity was piqued by his smile. She couldn't help but glare at him. Speak. It's not like I can't tell you. He held back his laughter. Emo Tiange couldn't bear it anymore. She pounced on him and pinched him. Don't keep me guessing. Tell me. All right, I'll tell you. Hugging her, he laughed and said, You definitely don't know that you talk in your sleep. Emo Tiange was stunned. Sleep talking. Yes. Sleep talking. Cultivators rarely slept, and when they occasionally fell asleep, no one would be by their side, so she didn't know about it at all. Thinking of this, she was a little nervous. What did I say? She was still smiling with his lips pursed. He lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, but he said, I won't talk about this. Speak. He clearly knew what he said, but he didn't tell her. This kind of feeling was too uncomfortable. Did he say something very mushy? I won't talk. He looked determined not to talk. Are you going to talk or not? If I won't talk, I won't talk. Speak. Ahem, if you throw yourself into my arms now, I can think about it. After a moment of silence, things began to fly in the small cave again. Go to hell. After tossing and turning for a long time, she still couldn't pry his mouth open. All the things were thrown away, and his wound opened again. With no other choice, she stopped to bandage his wound again. The two of them continued to squat down and pick up things. Suddenly, she was stunned. He picked up a stone the size of a child's fist. It was obviously a piece of ore. It was white in color, but there were many natural cracks on it. It looked no different from ordinary stones. He looked at it for a while, then suddenly opened his right hand. Flames appeared in his palm and surrounded the whole ore. "What are you doing?" Tiange was startled. Shi shook his head and didn't speak. He just focused on the ore in his palm. After a while, this ore finally changed. The cracks on it turned into clouds. Tiange's expression changed. She put away the flames in his palm and handed the ore to her. "Qian stone. Where did you get it?" "Qian stone." Tiange took it and was completely dumbfounded. "This is Qian stone." "Yes, I shouldn't be mistaken." She was also a bit surprised. "We've been looking for it for so long, but we didn't find it. Where did this come from?" "This is..." Tiange scratched her head. This was what they got from Ziwei's Immortal's cave after they divided the loot with Daoist Fangjing. It was actually the Qian stone that they'd only heard about but never seen. In that case, didn't she have a chance to get her natal magic weapon? Qian stone was found, and 1,000-year-old chalcedony wasn't too rare. As long as they found heavenly aromatic beans on Demonic Mountain, they could exchange them for chalcedony. "I got this the last time I went out to travel." She slowly told him about Ziwei's Immortal's cave, including how Wanderer Ziwei left a mark in her and Daoist Fangjing's Sea of Consciousness and how he asked them to find Xiao Xilan's remains and bury them together with him within 200 years. She didn't take this matter too seriously because she still wasn't strong enough. For now, she still couldn't accomplish what Wanderer Ziwei entrusted to her. Shi's expression turned solemn. "So you're saying that there's a mark in your brain that will flare up in 200 years? Tiange thought for a moment, then said, "It's been 49 years, so it should be 151 years later." He nodded but didn't say anything. He just lowered his head in contemplation. Tiange played with the Qian stone in her hand and said, "There's still 151 years left. Even if I can't form my nascent soul, I can at least reach the late stage of the core formation realm, right? I'll have more assurance when I go there." Shi shook his head, took her hand, and said, "Having a mark in your brain isn't a good thing. When we go back, we'll let Master see if he can remove it. If he can't, we'll have to think of a way to complete what he entrusted me with. I know what I'm doing." It was clear that he was rejecting him. She was silent for a long time before he sighed and said to her, "Tiange, can you not treat me as an outsider?" I don't." If he was an outsider, she wouldn't have said this kind of thing. Then why? He paused, trying to find a suitable way to say it. "I think you don't trust me too much. You always want to make your own decisions and aren't willing to listen to me." Tiange was stunned. She withdrew her hand, turned around, and silently sorted out the other things she threw in the cave. After she put everything into her Qianquan bag, she said, Maybe you haven't realized it, but you like to take the initiative too much. When I'm by your side, I almost don't need my own thoughts. I just need to follow you." She was a bit stunned. He really hadn't realized it. After thinking for a while, he said, "Is there anything wrong with that?" "There are some things you don't understand, but the things I know." Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Tiange's chuckle. This chuckle definitely wasn't the relaxed kind of chuckle, it carried a bit of helplessness and worry. She nodded and said, "You're right. This isn't a problem. If we were just companions, I'd think you'd be the best companion. However, this isn't the only time. The most fundamental problem between us is that your cultivation level is much higher than mine, and your experience is also much richer than mine. I still have to learn how to deal with some things, but you've already passed that stage. But have you ever thought about it? If I stay with you like this, will I still need to grow in the future? You'll be in charge of everything, but what about me? I'll be fine as long as I follow you. Isn't it like being a human furnace? He was dumbfounded for a moment before he said, You. Even if you stay with me, you can still grow. If you encounter a lot of things, you'll naturally know what to do. It's not that I can't, but that I don't need to, she said quietly. Do you think I just don't want to ask? I don't dare. No matter what your answer is, I don't dare. Just like now. You said you have me in your heart, and I'm very happy, but, even so, what should I do in the future? If we stay together, it won't just be a matter of feelings. His expression gradually darkened. After a long time, he said softly, Could it be that you want to leave me because of this? Silence spread in the cave. Tiange lowered her head and didn't say anything. Her attitude made him more and more restless. He grabbed her wrist then whispered, Then what do you want? After what you said, do you still want me to let go? Tiange shook her head softly. No. Let me think about it. I still don't know what to do now. Let me think clearly. Although she didn't directly refuse, he was disappointed. This represented a certain possibility, the possibility he was most afraid of. The most frightening thing wasn't losing something, but losing it after obtaining it. He remembered the story she told him just now. Wanderer's Way. Although he didn't personally experience it, he understood why this senior from several thousand years ago still lingered and refused to leave even after he passed away in meditation for several thousand years. Because he obtained it, lost it, and couldn't see it for the rest of his life, so he couldn't forget it until he died. If he didn't know her feelings just now, if he never obtained it and didn't know what it felt like to be in love with each other, maybe he would also slowly lose interest and walk on the road to becoming an immortal. But, it's impossible, he said softly. Don't do this kind of thing. I haven't, but you think so. He suddenly raised his voice and stared at her with a gloomy gaze. Then what do you want me to do? Tiange also raised her voice. I can't do nothing. So what if you just stay by my side? Can't I protect you? Why do you have to rely on yourself? We're like this. I can help you, and you can continue to cultivate. Forming your nascent soul or even deification isn't impossible. Tiange didn't say anything. She raised her head and looked at him as if he was a stranger, saying nothing. This kind of silence made him angry, but it also made him more restless. After a long time, he reached out and gently pulled her sleeve. Tiange, say something. Okay. She finally smiled, but it was a cold, unsmiling smile. This kind of smile scared him. She said, You really don't understand anything. Chapter 287. The sudden quarrel made the two of them feel suffocated, especially since they had no experience in quarreling with others. This kind of sulking feeling was too uncomfortable. Unfortunately, the space in this small cave was so big that they could occupy one end of it. They couldn't even find something to do even if they wanted to. Before long, She regretted it. Why did he waste so much effort to expand the cave just now? If it was still the same as before, he just needed to be thick-skinned and endure it, and it might be fine. But now, he couldn't endure it, and he couldn't put down his pride. He had never done this kind of thing, and he didn't know how to get along with women. He just felt that she was sometimes like this, sometimes like that, and didn't listen to anything he said. He really really didn't know what to do. But he didn't think he was wrong. There were many dual cultivation partners in this world. How could every pair of dual cultivation partners be equal in strength? There was always a front and a back. What was wrong with relying on one's partner? As he thought of this, he forgot that his self-esteem had been shattered into pieces by the word human furnace and could not recover for dozens of years. Emotienge kept her back to him and calmly tidied up the medicine bottles. He didn't know how she got so many things to tidy up, but she kept tidying up one after another. Until Devil Aura floated in from outside and blocked the entrance of the light. "I'm sorry." She was stunned. Emotienge coughed. Relying on the darkness and her back to him, she plucked up her courage. "I know you mean well, but, some things aren't that simple. Maybe you don't think it's a big deal, but it's very important to me." Even after a long time, there was no response. She couldn't help but feel annoyed. She wasn't good at quarreling, and she felt even more unhappy. Thus, she carried this annoyance into her words. "Of course, if you think all your ideas are right and do everything you say, then I have nothing to say." There was the sound of wind behind her. Just as she was about to turn around, she was hugged from behind. "I'm sorry." His voice was low, but it was very clear. It was only 3 words, but she felt all her previous anger disappear. The two of them hugged each other like this. "I know I was too impulsive just now. I shouldn't have given you time to think," he said. "There's no need for that." She pulled his hand away and turned around. Looking into his eyes in the dark, she said seriously, "I apologize for my attitude just now. I was also very impulsive. However, we still have to make things clear. Do you agree?" "Yes." Emotienge thought for a long time, but she didn't know where to start, so she might as well start from the beginning. "I was born in the secular world. Although I'm just an ordinary village girl, I inherited my mother's surname and my clan's seniority. From the very beginning, my mother raised me like a boy. When I was little, I wanted to study like those boys, and I wanted to read better than them. Mother always said that my father said that no matter if it was a man or a woman, his children should be brought up well. So she would give me whatever she could, and I would do my best to do what I could. Later on, Mother passed away and I set foot on the path of cultivation. I went to Kunwu and met Second Uncle. Second Uncle said that perhaps other female cultivators can slack off, but I can't. My physique is both a capital and a life-threatening talisman. Therefore, not only do I have to be more outstanding than female cultivators, but I also have to work harder than most male cultivators." After talking for a long time like this, she almost forgot what she wanted to say. There were some things she rarely recalled because every time she did, there was only one person. But now, there was someone listening, so she couldn't help but talk about those 10-odd years, about the joys and sorrows she experienced with Second Uncle. "I've already become accustomed to this kind of life, and this has also become my own belief. It's not that I don't trust you or don't want to listen to you, but this goes against my belief for so many years." Second Uncle said that being sentimental and weak are the archenemies of female cultivators, so he always asked me to be independent and to not rely on anyone, even if one day I find someone who can accompany me. She raised her head and met his gaze. "If I really don't have to do anything in the future, it would be tantamount to denying my previous life of more than 80 years. The devil aura floated away, illuminating the cave. She didn't say anything for a long time, but he also didn't let go of her. These memories reminded him of the 3 years he spent in Yunwu's sect. During those 3 years, he was indifferent at first, then he discovered her secret, and in the end, he was very interested. When he first learned about her secret, he was a bit confused because she was different from those women he looked down on. Then he thought maybe she was the kind of woman he admired, like Martial Uncle Meowie or Senior Martial Sister Sushin. Later, he thought she was tenacious and hardworking. If a cultivator had such qualities, they could achieve great things if they had enough fated chances and luck. In the next few decades, he watched her grow step by step. In the past, he thought it was really good that she had such a strong character. These were all qualities he admired. At least she wouldn't turn into a woman he hated. But now that their relationship was different, he felt that it was not the case. So what if she relied on him? If he couldn't bring her anything, what was the point of being with him? He felt very confused, so he said the same thing. Mo Tianga's eyes widened. She turned around and glared at him. Do you think bringing me something is meaningful to me? She also widened his eyes. Isn't that the case? Mo Tianga was speechless. Only now did she realize there was a problem with their communication. What's wrong? Tell me. She thought for a moment then asked, what if we switched places? He didn't understand what she meant. She said again, what if our genders were switched, and you were a woman? This assumption made Qin-Shi's face darken. Do I look like a woman? Mo Tianga slapped his hand away, leaned against the rock wall, and looked at him with her arms crossed. In fact, you don't think highly of women, do you? Yes. Although he knew it was better to deny it, he still chose to admit it. Then do you look down on me? Of course not. He hurriedly explained, if I looked down on you, I wouldn't have contacted you in Yunwi's sect. I already knew you were a woman, but, seeing his expression, Mo Tianga smiled. Why are you so anxious? I didn't say anything about you. He sighed, feeling like he couldn't explain himself. Mo Tianga looked at him and said, you see, you actually have a certain degree of prejudice against women because some people don't want to make progress. If I were like those women who don't want to make progress, would you still look at me differently? No. Then that's it, she said briskly, isn't the reason why you look at me differently because of my personality? If we get together and I rely on you in the future, after a long time, maybe you'll think I'm very annoying. How could that be possible? He denied instinctively, but he couldn't give a reason. No need for this and that. I'm not making things difficult for you. Mo Tianga pressed his hand and said earnestly, in fact, I only discovered another side of you after coming out this time. What? He was a bit nervous. Let's assume. She carefully chose her words. If I get together with you, you'll take care of everything, right? What's wrong with that? She didn't answer and continued to say, you'll do everything, you'll shoulder all the responsibilities, and you'll solve all the problems. Will that be the case? He couldn't answer. She didn't need to hear his answer. Just by looking at his guilty expression, Mo Tianga already knew his answer. I'm not saying it's bad for you to be like this. She said, from Immortal's point of view, you're a responsible person. You'll do things for the person you like rather than instructing others to do things. Just like those villagers in Mo family's village who always let their wives run circles around them, Mo Tianga was just like those villagers in Mo family's village. But we're cultivators. I'm not a mortal woman. If I follow you like this, I won't have a sense of existence. After saying that, she didn't know what to say, so she asked, do you understand? She was still silent. No one knew what he was thinking. It wasn't until a long time later that he said, I think. I probably understand what you mean. You want to say that me being like this will turn you into the kind of woman who does nothing but rely on others. Just like Martial Uncle Meowie and Senior Martial Sister Sushin, he couldn't imagine that they would stand behind a man. Presumably. Tianga also couldn't do that. More or less. In fact, she wanted to say that his personality was too strong, but her personality was also very tough. If they stayed together like this, there would definitely be conflicts. But if she said that, he would be nervous again, wouldn't he? All right. He said seriously, I'll try to change as much as I can. I won't take care of everything and I'll give you a chance to grow. I'll let you rely on your own strength to move forward. Is this enough? She smiled but didn't say anything. Instead, she slowly leaned on him, opened her arms, and for the first time, took the initiative to hug him. He also smiled, but he also said seriously, but I also have a request for you. First, she interrupted him. How many more do you have? I've just started. He was dissatisfied. All right, you go first. First, no matter what happens in the future, don't try to solve it by leaving. Do you agree or not? He urged. Yes. Mo Tiange didn't hesitate for too long. This request wasn't excessive at all. If they could be together honestly, there was naturally nothing that couldn't be solved. Second, you can try to have a request for me. Huh? What kind of request is this? Seeing her doubt, she smiled. Although I appreciate self-reliant women, if you're too strong, I won't have a sense of existence. So, if you can rely on me for something, just rely on me. She didn't answer for a long time, so he was a bit nervous. Not good. All right, we'll both take a step back. She couldn't ask him to take a step back for everything. If she did that, wouldn't it be no different from asking for everything? She was a very fair person. But there's no third request, right? She smiled and hugged her tightly. No. Mo Tiange counted her fingers and said, you have 2 requests, and I can also change them. Let's make a 2-point agreement. Ha! This also wants the same. Isn't it too fair? She ignored him and continued to say, first, you have to trust me. No matter what the situation is, you have to believe what I say. As long as you can do it, I'll also trust you completely. Okay. He didn't hesitate at all. Second, give me a chance to grow on my own until I can stand side by side with you. No problem. Third, didn't you say there's a 2-point agreement? I was just saying. Chapter 288. Mo Tiange held the stone in her hand and stared at it for a long time. This was the Qiyun stone she got from Wanderer Ziwei and had forgotten in the depths of her Chinquan bag. This Qiyun stone wasn't big, it was only the size of a child's fist, but she said such a big Qiyun stone was already very rare. The Qiyun stone he saw was even smaller. Okay, she wasn't greedy. It was good enough to have it. However, such a small Qiyun stone couldn't be wasted when refining magic weapons. She could only refine it twice at most, which required a high level of tool refining skills. Her tool refining talent was really not good. It wasn't that she didn't practice these years, but she could only refine magic weapons now, and the success rate wasn't very high. Originally, she was going to find a tool refining master in the group to refine magic weapons, but if she only had 2 Qiyun stones, she didn't even dare to find a tool refining master. Refining a natal magic treasure was not the same as refining an ordinary magic treasure. A natal magic treasure had to be connected with the cultivator, so the cultivator had to be present when refining the magic treasure. When to add the blood essence and what effect to achieve, the refiner had to have a very good understanding of the cultivator and the magic treasure. The best way was to refine it herself, but in that case, she would have to spend a lot of effort and time to improve her tool refining skills. So troublesome. She muttered to herself. What troublesome? Qin Shi, who was meditating to heal his wounds, opened his eyes and glanced at her. Mo Tiange held the Qiyun stone in her hand and said, we have the materials, but it's very troublesome to refine it. That thing is only a kind of magic weapon conceived by primordial Lady Bisui. She never tested whether it would work or not. Besides, there are so few materials. Qin, she said, I'll refine it myself. It's better to refine a natal magic weapon with someone else's help than to refine it myself. Mo Tiange smiled bitterly. It'd be good if it was that easy, but I don't know how to refine tools. Learn, it's not that difficult. Hearing this understatement, Mo Tiange glared at him. It's easy for you to say, but not everyone has such good tool refining talent. Qin, she raised his eyebrows. I think your pill refining skills are very good. Refining tools and refining pills are the same, so your tool refining skills shouldn't be too bad. This is different. Her pill refining skills were honed by using countless spiritual herbs, but where could she get so many materials for refining weapons? If he were to purchase them wantonly, it would attract too much attention. Why is it different? You will know in the future. Qin, she didn't say much. He just stared at her with a gaze that made her feel very uneasy. Mo Tiange felt uncomfortable from his stare. What are you looking at? Have you recovered from your injury? Qin, she turned around. Do you want to have a checkup? Forget it. She muttered. To a cultivator, this kind of injury might look terrible, but after a few days, it would heal without even a scar. He was clearly seizing the opportunity to do something. Sure enough, Qin, she was very disappointed, but he still didn't give up and asked, You really don't want it? Mo Tiange rolled her eyes at him, then put away the Qiyun stone and continued to ponder about magic weapons. The injuries to their meridians and dantians were almost healed after they healed each other. Right now, Qin Shi's injuries were mainly flesh wounds and would be healed in a few days. Mo Tiange's injuries were injuries to her divine sense. Although she looked completely fine, she would need several years to recuperate. When are we going up? This question made Qin Shi put away his smile. He stared at her with a meaningful gaze. Don't you want to stay here for a few more days? Don't we still have things to do? Mo Tiange lowered her head and didn't notice his expression. I'll feel uneasy if I don't finish them. He didn't say anything. The two of them minded their own business. They were inside the mountain wall of tens of thousands of feet peak. Although there was devil aura outside, it was blocked by the restrictions they set up. It wouldn't be too much to say that this was the safest place on Demonic Mountain. It had been 7 or 8 days since Demonic Mountain opened, and many cultivators had encountered danger outside. If they wanted to preserve their strength, it was best to stay here. He originally thought it would be best to stay here for another 7 days. Half a month was enough time to do things, and this place wouldn't be disturbed. Rumble. Suddenly, a loud noise came from somewhere, and the mountain began to shake. What's wrong? Sensing that the small cave they were in was also shaking, Mo Tiange's expression changed. Could it be that the mountain here is also going to collapse? Qin Shi looked solemn. In just a short while, they saw countless stones rolling down through the gap in the cave entrance. The defensive restrictions they set up to block devil aura couldn't stand it and broke in no time. Not good. A big restriction is collapsing. Mo Tiange was stunned. Just like what happened more than 80 years ago. Qin Shi shook his head. It shouldn't be as serious as it was 80 years ago. But the trouble is, it's very close to us this time. He stepped forward and pulled Mo Tiange over. He took out his 3-yang real fire sword and formed a defensive sword formation around the two of them. Where's your defensive magic weapon? Mo Tiange fumbled in her Qianquan bag. The white silk handkerchief turned into mist and wrapped around the two of them. The shaking became more and more violent. The two of them held each other tightly and were barely able to stand firm. Fortunately, the cave they were in went deep into the mountain. It was very sturdy and small, so there were no signs of collapse. The shaking continued for almost an hour without stopping, and there were still many stones falling from above. Emotianga couldn't help but raise her head and ask, "Why is it taking so long?" "Chin," she said, "back then, your father and I were trapped here for 7 days. During the first 3 days, stones kept falling and almost buried us here. Later, we went to the top of the mountain and saw that the towering mountain had actually been flattened. Rest assured, it'll be fine." Emotianga wasn't worried about anything. Relying on their magic weapons and cultivation levels, even if the restrictions on 10,000 feet peak collapsed, it wouldn't be a problem for them to keep their lives here. However, she was worried that the restrictions at the entrance would be affected and appear prematurely, causing them to be trapped here. The rumbling sounds grew louder, and through the cracks, more and more rocks rolled down. Both of them had a grave expression on their faces. It seemed that the commotion was too big. All of a sudden, a cyan figure appeared among these stones. A white light flashed and in an instant, it entered the gap in the cave entrance they were in. Then, a cyan-clothed man jumped inside. Cough, cough. The man coughed twice. He was covered in stone fragments and his face was covered in dust. He was in a very sorry state. He dusted off the debris on his sleeves and pulled out the flying sword inserted in the cave entrance. When he turned around and saw the two of them, he was stunned. "It's you." This person was Jing Xingji. He looked at them and finally looked at their interlocked hands. He said with a faint smile, "You two really know how to pick a place. Here, there's really no one to disturb you." She didn't like him, and his words were so ambiguous. She's expression immediately darkened. "Fellow Daoist Jing, please conduct yourself with dignity." Cough, cough. Jing Xingji dusted off the debris and said, "How am I not conducting myself? I'm not falsely accusing you." As he said that, he cast a sidelong glance at him. "Fellow Daoist Shojing, the matter between a man and a woman is a man's great desire. Why do you have to hide it?" "Jing Xingji." She shouted. The more he talked, the more outrageous he became. All right. Jing Xingji waved his hand and said carelessly, "You're thin-skinned, so I won't talk about it, okay?" His peach blossom eyes looked at Emotianga. "Unfortunately, fellow Daoist Qingwei, we met too late." She didn't say anything. He directly waved his hand, and the 3-yang real fire sword floated in front of him. Jing Xingji retreated helplessly. "I'm afraid of you. I was just joking. Why are you so boring?" Then he said rudely, "Lend me a place to hide." After he said that, a sword light flashed and the flying sword went into the stones. He held the flying sword and looked outside vigilantly. He looked like he was on guard against something. Emotianga asked, "Fellow Daoist Jing, why did you appear here?" Jing Xingji still looked outside and said casually, "What else can I do? I was tricked by those 2 old guys." "You're smart and left early." As soon as he said that, Shi's attention was also drawn to him. Jing Xingji glanced at them and said, "I originally guessed that Kumu and Tong Tianyun, those 2 old guys, must have other purposes, but we're old friends for more than 100 years, so I wasn't too vigilant against them. We originally planned to split up at the foot of tens of thousands of feet peak, but they said their purpose this time was Immortal's ruins, so the 3 of us all followed them." "Did you arrive at Immortal's ruins smoothly?" She asked. Jing Xingji shook his head. "Not at all. Madame Feng's injuries became more and more serious. They abandoned her when they crossed the Ruoshui River, but Lei Dongqing unexpectedly turned back to save her and died in the Ruoshui River with her. Alas, I really couldn't tell." I thought Lei Dongqing just liked Madame Feng's beauty, so he usually teased her. I didn't expect him to be infatuated with her. Unfortunately. Qin Shi and Mo Tiange looked at each other. They were both surprised and secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, they escaped in time. Otherwise, even if they were on guard, they would definitely get into a lot of trouble if they were involved in this dispute. What about you? Why did you fall from above? You should have arrived at Immortal's ruins with them, right? Jing Xingji nodded. As soon as Lei Dongqing and Madame Feng died, I knew those two old guys were up to no good. They've been using us along the way. But we were already halfway there. I couldn't advance or retreat on my own, let alone fall out with them, so I had no choice but to continue moving forward with them. Fortunately, we didn't encounter anything too dangerous later. Then why did you come down from above? Were you plotted against by them? I jumped down on my own. Jing Xingji's expression was still indifferent even though he almost died on Demonic Mountain. It seemed he didn't hate Kumu and Tong Tianyun at all. Those two old guys actually made an appointment with several nascent soul seniors in front of Immortal's ruins. It seemed they wanted to follow them to look for treasures. When they entered Immortal's ruins, they left me outside. Not long after, a restriction in Immortal's ruins collapsed. I don't know if it was triggered by them or not, but when I saw the situation wasn't good, I made up my mind and jumped down from above. In the end, I managed to save my life. So that's what they were planning. Qin Shi mused. Jing Xingji turned his head and looked at him with a smile. I say, fellow Daoist Shoujing, in any case, we've been friends for more than 100 years. Now that we're in trouble together, you won't mind taking me with you when you go up, right? Chapter 289. Mo Tiange was a little surprised. Did she guess Jing Xingji's intentions wrong? He was actually willing to act with them and didn't mind her low cultivation level. On second thought, the situation had changed. Jing Xingji didn't have anyone to cooperate with except them. Even if her cultivation level was a bit low, the three of them could go up and try their luck. Qin Shi didn't look happy or angry. He just asked, fellow Daoist Jing, didn't you just come back with your life? Why do you still want to go up? Jing Xingji touched his nose and said, I had no choice but to go alone. Since I ran into you guys, of course I want to go back and see if I can get some benefits. After all, Immortal's ruins isn't easy to go up. He blinked and said, hey, you're so sure you can take your junior martial sister away? In fact, you've been confident for a long time, right? Qin Shi didn't speak for a while. Judging from his expression, he wasn't unhappy, but he didn't agree immediately either. Mo Tiange looked at Jing Xingji and suddenly felt he was very familiar. Right, Qin Shi also did this. Speaking of which, although their characters weren't compatible, their conversations always gave people a sense of familiarity. What kind of familiar relationship could they have? Their personalities were completely different, and they didn't agree with each other at all. I'll say this first. When we get up there, the place we're going to is only a corner of Immortal's ruins. If you want to go somewhere else, we definitely won't accompany you. Jing Xingji didn't care at all. Whatever. Alright, let's join hands. Qin Shi said calmly, and Jing Xingji just smiled. The two of them didn't high-five or do anything equivalent to a promise, they just did their own things. This time, the earthquake lasted for a whole day. By the time the mountain stabilized, the three of them were unbearably tired. Each of them used their strongest defensive means and were ready to attack at any time. Although it was more daunting than dangerous, they consumed a lot of spiritual aura. Moreover, there was also floating devil aura on the way, so they used up a lot of spiritual aura. The three of them rested in the small cave for a day. When they were full of spiritual aura, they continued to fly to the summit. With Jing Xingji's help, the journey was a lot easier. With Qin Shi's 3 yang real fire sword formation, Mo Tianga's white silk handkerchief, and Jing Xingji's protective sword light, they originally thought they would need more than a day to reach the summit, but they arrived in just 1 day. If not for the large amount of demonic energy released due to the collapse of the restriction at the summit, the 3 of them would not have dared to approach it. Perhaps, they would have been even faster. Upon reaching the summit, Mo Tianga was dumbfounded. This is Immortal's ruins. There were rocks everywhere, spirits and demons mixed together. It was a barren wasteland. How could there be a word celestial here? Qin Shi said, the so-called Immortal's ruins is just what we, the later generations, call it. Demonic Mountain has been a battlefield since ancient times. Although it's said to bury all the Immortals, it's actually just a place where all the Immortals fell. Mo Tianga heaved a sigh. Before the Immortals and demons were separated, the ones who died here were real Immortals. Perhaps they would never be able to achieve such heights in their entire lives, but these Immortals had only fallen to such a state. Jing Xingji grinned and said, don't underestimate this place. Even after so many years, there are still many treasures left behind by the Immortals. It all depends on whether you have the opportunity to obtain them. Really? Looking into the distance, they couldn't see anything special except for one thing: the spiritual aura here was too strong. There was a transparent layer of spiritual aura floating in the sky, purer and cleaner than the spiritual aura they had seen before. In the area enveloped by this spiritual aura layer, the demonic aura could only move around the periphery. What's that? How come I've never seen such a special spiritual aura? It's immortal aura, Qin Shi said. Too many Immortals died here. After they died, their bodies didn't remain, they all turned into immortal aura. I see. Alright, if you have something to say, you can talk about it later. It's time to get to work. Jing Xingji waved his hand. The flying sword on his back was unsheathed, ready to go, and he took the lead. Qin Shi also nodded at her. Let's go. Although there was no devil aura, immortal aura was equally terrifying. They were only cultivators, not immortals. The powerful power contained in immortal aura wasn't something they could withstand. Once their bodies were invaded by immortal aura, their bodies would explode and they would die. The 3 of them used all kinds of defensive methods and cautiously entered the rubble. Before they arrived at tens of thousands of feet peak, they could occasionally see skeletons in some places, but on this peak, it was completely clean. After Immortals died, even their bones wouldn't be left behind, they would directly turn into immortal aura. There were many traces left behind by spells in the surroundings. Even after 1,000,000 years, these traces could still be clearly distinguished. Because Immortals had the ability to move mountains and drain seas, the power of their spells was too great, so the traces left behind were naturally spectacular. For example, this tens of thousands of feet peak was originally connected to other peaks, but it was cut off by some kind of immortal weapon, turning it into a lone peak. It wasn't easy for them to even take a stone off this tens of thousands of feet peak, but for Immortals, they could easily split it. There was also a huge lake on this peak. Upon a closer look, it was actually a trace left behind by a water spell. After 1,000,000 years, it actually still existed. There were also the rubble, the blackened traces, and the huge holes. All of them were traces left behind by spells. Although she didn't see the remains of Immortals, Mo Tianga clearly saw that magnificent battle 1,000,000 years ago. This gave her a wonderful feeling as if she was personally experiencing that battle, seeing spells flying everywhere and immortal weapons crisscrossing. Qin Shi walked very slowly on purpose, as if he was deliberately letting her experience this feeling. Jing Xingji wore a rare solemn expression as he silently watched the scene in front of him. The three people's almost leisurely advancing speed was disrupted by the sudden attack. Jing Xingji, who was walking in the front, suddenly stepped on something. A slight click sound was heard, and then a burst of light smoke rose. Jing Xingji's reaction was also very fast. His flying sword flew out at lightning speed, and he leaped into the air, barely dodging a flash of lightning. Mo Tiange and Qin Shi instantly flew away. Qin Shi's three-yang real fire sword immediately counterattacked. Mo Tiange waved her hand, and the white silk handkerchief turned into a wisp of light smoke, twining around him. At the same time, she held a magic weapon in her hand, ready to attack at any time. Soon after, the three people were stunned. Because it wasn't a demonic beast, nor was it a restriction, but a wisp of light smoke. Jing Xingji's sword light had already pierced it, and Qin Shi's three-yang real fire sword also instantly emitted a fiery red light. However, this wisp of light smoke was split apart and instantly gathered again. What's this? Jing Xingji looked at Qin Shi in astonishment. Did you see it last time? Qin Shi shook his head. I also don't know. Mo Tiange naturally didn't know either. Just as they spoke, that wisp of light smoke slowly rushed towards them. The three people didn't dare to be careless and retreated. Mo Tiange's speed was slightly slower, so she felt a pain in her arm. She looked down and saw that wherever the wisp of light smoke floated past, a part of the white silk handkerchief's fog was corroded, and a part of her sleeve was also scorched. Qin Shi stepped forward and pulled her. After retreating a certain distance, he pulled up her sleeve, only to see that her originally smooth arm was also scorched black. Qin Shi's expression changed. Does it hurt? Mo Tiange frowned and said, let's not worry about it for now. What should we do with this thing? Jing Xingji glanced at her with that faint smile on his face and said, my flying sword can't cut it, and my magic can't burn it. What else can we do? We can only run. As soon as he finished speaking, he rode his flying sword and ran away madly. Qin Shi shook his head. In the next moment, he flung his sleeve, summoned his flying cloud, and pulled Mo Tiange to escape. That wisp of light smoke caught up with them. It wasn't slow, but both Jing Xingji's flying sword and Qin Shi's flying cloud were extremely fast. Before long, that wisp of light smoke finally stopped chasing them. The three people stopped and all heaved sighs of relief. What kind of strange thing is this? Jing Xingji muttered. No one answered him. Qin Shi pulled Mo Tiange's sleeve and looked at her skin corroded by the wisp of light smoke. He frowned and said, something's wrong. This thing, at first, she only felt a little pain, but now, Mo Tiange felt a burning pain. Moreover, this kind of pain was getting worse and worse. She originally endured it, but in the end, she couldn't bear it anymore. She grabbed Qin Shi's sleeve, sweating profusely. It hurts a lot. Qin Shi knew her temperament. If it wasn't really painful, she definitely wouldn't scream, so he immediately took out a medicinal pill from his qianquan bag. Eat this. Mo Tiange swallowed it as he said and felt a little better. Qin Shi pressed her arm and slowly released his spiritual aura. Starting from the wound, he carefully examined it bit by bit. What's wrong? Is there something strange about this thing? Jing Xingji asked. Qin Shi didn't say anything. After a while, he suddenly made a hand seal. A string of real fire came out of his palm and stuck to the scorched area. Mo Tiange shivered. His real fire wasn't an ordinary cultivator's real fire. He originally cultivated a fire element cultivation technique, and his body also had pure yang spiritual aura. When it burned, her arm, which was already numb, felt another kind of pain. Qin Shi noticed it. He paused for a moment, then used his yang spiritual aura to surround the real fire and slowly burned it. The pain eased a little, and Tiange slowly felt the yang spiritual aura enter her body. She didn't need to use it herself, the yin spiritual aura in her body followed it, and the two of them converged. Qin Shi's real fire was surrounded by yin and yang spiritual aura and slowly burned it. After a long time, the scorched area finally began to shrink. By the time the scorched area disappeared from Tiange's arm, most of their spiritual aura had been consumed. Jing Xingji didn't understand what happened. Now that they stopped, he asked, "What's going on? Your real fire can burn it, but why didn't it work just now?" Qin Shi said, "This is the extreme yang real fire I comprehended when I formed my nascent soul. It's different from the real fire on the 3 yang real fire sword. Then why didn't you use it just now?" This question made Qin Shi snort. "That's easy for you to say. It's very troublesome to mobilize this real fire. The smoke was too fast, I couldn't do it in time." "Oh, I see." Jing Xingji nodded. "Since you can heal, I'm relieved. Don't be happy too early." Qin Shi glanced at him indifferently. "If it were you, I wouldn't be able to help." "Huh?" Jing Xingji was puzzled. "Why?" Qin Shi didn't answer. He just shook his head and said to Tiange, "Rest for a while and restore your spiritual aura." His extreme yang real fire was very overbearing. If it weren't for his and Tiange's yin and yang spiritual aura acting as a buffer, Tiange's hand would have been burned before she could burn the black aura. Chapter 290. Tiange and Qin Shi took turns to meditate, leaving one person on guard. Clearly, they didn't trust Jing Xingji. Jing Xingji was bored, so he said he was going to look around. When his figure disappeared, Qin Shi, who was meditating, suddenly opened his eyes and said, "This brat is also dishonest." Although Qin Shi's attitude had always been very clear that he didn't like Jing Xingji, he seemed to be very familiar with Jing Xingji. For example, if he wasn't familiar with Jing Xingji, he would never call him brat. Tiange asked, "What's your relationship with him? I always feel that although you two don't talk much, you know each other very well." Qin Shi smiled and said, "Of course I know him. I've known him for more than 100 years, even earlier than Kumu and the others." "Oh. Why is that?" Qin Shi didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked her with a smile, "Why don't you guess?" Tiange thought for a while and said, "You said he was a disciple of venerable swordsman Zhongguang from Gujin sect. Unfortunately, his master died early, so he wasn't very successful in Gujin sect. Presumably, when his master was still alive, he was also a proud son of heaven, right?" Qin Shi nodded. "Yes." Tiange said, "Judging from his age, he seems to be about the same as you, so the difference should be no more than 100 years. Since the two of you are about the same age and both are proud disciples of nascent soul cultivators from big sects, it's not too much to say you're the same kind of people. Did you meet because of that?" Qin Shi just smiled and pulled her to sit next to him. "Did I guess right or not?" "You're half right." Qin Shi paused and said slowly, "In fact, when I met him, I didn't know his identity. Could it be that the two of you met each other when you were traveling?" "Yes. At that time, I was in the middle stage of the foundation building realm, and so was he." "So early?" Tiange was a little surprised. Middle stage of the foundation building realm. Wasn't he only in his 30s or 40s? Qin Shi smiled and opened his left hand. With a dazzling golden light, the 3 yang real fire sword appeared in his hand. He looked at the sword and said with emotion, "In the blink of an eye, it's been more than 150 years. Back then, I obtained the method to refine this sword and the cultivation technique together with him. We even encountered the young spiritual bead at that time. What? Upon seeing Imo Tianga's incredulous expression, Qin Shi sheathed his sword and slowly explained in detail. At that time, I hadn't entered the middle stage of the foundation building realm for long. One time, when I was outside, I happened to enter a place called Mount Lang with someone else. That place was very strange. This mountain was surrounded by excellent high-grade spirit veins, but it didn't have even the slightest bit of spiritual aura. No spiritual aura. A thought flashed through Imo Tianga's mind. She asked, "Is it because of the young spiritual bead?" Qin Shi nodded with a smile. Yes. It was said that a long time ago, there was an ancient immortal's cave here, so many people came here to search for treasures. At first, I didn't believe this rumor, but I also felt that this place was strange. So, I went with the others. Who would have thought that when we arrived, an immortal's cave really did appear in the middle of Mount Lang. Mount Lang immediately became a living hell. Low-level cultivators swarmed in, and high-level cultivators appeared frequently. He was lost in thought for a while before continuing. Too many people died at that time. In the end, those high-level cultivators had the upper hand and occupied the cave. At that time, my cultivation level was still low, so I naturally didn't fight with them. I just secretly sent a message to my master, telling him about the situation here. Then, I happened to meet Jing Xingji. Just like me, he happened to escape a calamity. We were in the same situation, and we were in trouble together, so we naturally joined hands. What happened next? Since you obtained the method to refine the 3 yang real fire sword and the yang spiritual bead, presumably Jing Xingji also obtained some benefits, right? And, Qin Shi said faintly, the sword in his hand is an ancient cultivation sword. It's extremely powerful. Our luck was good. It turns out that there was an ancient cultivation sect hidden in Mount Lang. The Immortal's cave didn't count for much, but we found the real treasure trove. This ancient cultivation group seemed to have been exterminated in the end, leaving behind a lot of treasures. I guess the reason they were exterminated was probably because of the existence of the yang spiritual bead. All the spirit veins in the mountain were sucked dry, so this cultivation group naturally couldn't continue to exist. Imo Tianga sighed with emotion. In that case, the 2 of you are the biggest winners of this trip. Qin Shi smiled. It's not our turn. We managed to save our lives with great difficulty. Later, Master finally arrived, and Venerable Swordsman Zhongguang also happened to come. It was only then that we found out the other party's identity. In the end, the treasures in Mount Lang were divided among several big cultivation groups. The benefits Jing Xingji and I obtained couldn't be considered much. That was true. An entire ancient cultivation group had countless treasures. Presumably, they were only a few more than the collections of the 7 big cultivation groups. Even if many of them couldn't be used anymore, they were still a huge fortune. But even so, I really don't have a good impression of this person. He's much more trustworthy than Kumu and the others, but after Venerable Swordsman Zhongguang passed away, he suffered a lot of unfair treatment and attached great importance to benefits. I don't like this kind of character. Imo Tianga nodded. Moreover, he's frivolous. He's not the same kind of person as us. Upon hearing what she said, Qin Shi smiled and tightened his grip on her hand. Jing Xingji had been flirting with her on the way. Although he didn't take it seriously, he always felt uncomfortable. Now that he heard what she said, he felt all the knots in his heart disappeared. How could the woman he fancied be like those superficial people who only looked at appearances? Even if Jing Xingji's face was like a peach blossom and his tongue was like honey, she still wouldn't like him. The 2 of them were silently enjoying a moment of peace when Imo Tianga suddenly remembered something. Has your spiritual aura recovered? She nodded. I have the yang spiritual bead, so my spiritual aura recovers much faster. I've been fine for a long time. Tiange paused for a moment and suddenly understood. In other words, he deliberately let Jing Xingji leave just now to avoid talking to me. Thinking up to this point, Tiange felt her face burning. She coughed and said, then let's talk about it later. She said, when I said this boy wasn't honest, I didn't just say it casually. Tiange was stunned. What did you see? She snorted and said, with his character, if he didn't have certain benefits, he wouldn't have followed us to Immortal's ruins. I'm sure his original purpose was here. Tiange knew nothing about Jing Xingji's character, so she couldn't say anything. However, she was never a person who talked nonsense. Since he said it, he must have his reasons. If that's the case, won't he implicate us? She shook his head. Let's wait and see. Although he and I aren't friends, we've been friends for more than 100 years. He's a person who values benefits, but he won't stab us in the back. At most, he'll tell us to pray for our own luck. Tiange nodded. You believe him, and I believe you. Upon hearing this, Shi smiled and said softly, when we go back, we'll report it to Master, okay? Tiange naturally understood the meaning of his words, but she was a bit hesitant. Let's talk about it later. She was stunned. Why? Didn't she agree? Tiange looked away and avoided his gaze. When we go back, you'll enter closed-door meditation to form your nascent soul, right? This was almost certain. He already said that he failed to form his nascent soul 3 times because he missed her. He tried everything he could but couldn't get rid of her. Now that they were committed, with his character, he'd naturally go back to form his nascent soul. Of course, she said, when we find your father's corpse, we can go back. Now that everything is ready, we won't have to worry about forming our nascent soul. Seeing that she didn't speak, Shi's expression slowly darkened. Tiange, what are you thinking? Why do I feel like I still can't understand you? You're not willing to rely on me too much, so I can understand you. But now, we're all ready. Don't you want to perform dual cultivation with me? Tiange was stunned for a while before she said, I just think now isn't the right time. You want to form your nascent soul, so you naturally can't be distracted. As for me, I also need some time to adapt to core formation. Let's take it slow. She didn't say anything, but his gaze revealed his displeasure. After a while, he said, I originally didn't plan to perform dual cultivation before I formed my nascent soul, but I don't want to wait anymore. Why? Tiange couldn't help but ask, isn't it good for us to be like this now? She asked too quickly as if she was unwilling, so Shi's expression didn't look good. He calmed down and asked, then, after we go back, are you willing to move to my Immortal's cave? Tiange was stunned. You have to enter closed-door meditation to form your nascent soul, and I might also enter closed-door meditation during this period of time. This isn't necessary, right? Shi smiled with a hint of self-mockery. You see, you're always so restrained, which gives me the illusion that you don't have that many feelings. Sometimes I feel strange. How can there be a woman like you? So calm that people feel you're heartless. This obviously wasn't a compliment, his tone even carried a hint of complaint. People were always strange like this. He hoped to have a quiet and rational woman who wouldn't affect his cultivation, but she was too quiet and rational, which made him feel unreconciled. He always felt he wasn't that important in her heart. Tiange didn't refute him. She was silent for a while, then said slowly, I thought about it a long time ago. We're cultivators, so we're different from mortals. Even if we live together, so what? Cultivators spend most of their long lives in closed-door meditation. How much time do we really have together? Maybe not as much as mortal couples. That being the case, why should we be in such a hurry? Yes, you're right. However, there's a way to solve this. Emotiengo was puzzled. What way? We practice the same cultivation technique, Chin, she said. With our constitutions, dual cultivation is better than others. If we practice the same cultivation technique, our progress will definitely be amazing. Emotiengo was shocked. You mean, we should give up our current cultivation technique and practice dual cultivation? Emotiengo once again fell silent after receiving confirmation. Dual cultivation techniques were cultivation techniques that Dao companions practicing dual cultivation together practiced. The most famous dual cultivation group in the celestial pole was Biyun sect, one of the 7 great cultivation groups. Most of the disciples of Biyun sect practice dual cultivation techniques, and only when a man and a woman practice dual cultivation together could they achieve miraculous results. However, they were different. She and Chin Shi each had their own special cultivation techniques. Her Suna art of the origin, while his art of 3 primordial cycles and pure yang technique had already reached a certain realm. Furthermore, they were very compatible with each other's constitutions. With their current situation, they usually cultivated separately. Occasionally being together was enough for the cycle of yin and yang. It would be a pity if they gave up. We don't have a suitable cultivation technique. Besides, if we did that, wouldn't my spiritual roots of the origin be meaningless? This is different, Chin, she said firmly. Just tell me if you agree or not. If you agree, I'll take care of these things. Chapter 291. I don't know. After a long time, Emotiengo sighed and said, I always feel that you walk too fast and think too fast. I can't keep up with your footsteps. Chin Shi was stunned. He was silent. The two of them sat in silence for a while, experiencing this feeling in their hearts. They both had their own opinions. Since they embarked on the path of cultivation, they never stopped for others and never accommodated to other people's ideas. Once they decided what to do, they would walk according to their own ideas. But it was different now. They had to adapt to another person's footsteps and take into consideration another person's ideas. Some things couldn't be the same as before. Let me think about it, she said. And, Chin Shi answered softly. It's not that I don't agree or anything. After a while, Emotiengo said slowly, it's just. I'm not used to this feeling. Do you understand? After a while, Chin Shi nodded. I understand. After a while, he held her hand and smiled. Do you think I'm too anxious? That I didn't give you time to adapt? A little bit, Emotiengo said, slowly thinking about the feeling in her heart. It's too fast. I can't adapt. Besides, I think we both have our own ideas about cultivation. Why don't we continue according to our original plan? You want to form your nascent soul, so you'll definitely enter closed-door meditation when you go back. As for me, I have to refine my natal magic weapon and study core formation cultivation techniques to slowly adapt to some things in the core formation stage. Now isn't the time for us to be carefree. If we change our current lives too hastily, won't we mess up our pace? Seeing that Chin Shi's face finally brightened, she smiled. You said we'll practice the same cultivation technique, but I think there are still many problems to solve. First, there's the gap between our cultivation levels. If we perform dual cultivation after you form your nascent soul, it'll naturally be beneficial for me, but it's not a good choice for you. But if you don't form your nascent soul because of this, it's even worse. You're already in the peak stage of the core formation realm. If we continue to waste time, it'll only be a waste of time. She paused and looked at Qin-Shi's expression. Qin-Shi nodded. You're right. Second, our constitutions and spiritual roots are both special. If we choose dual cultivation, won't we be able to make full use of each other's characteristics? Otherwise, wouldn't all of this be meaningless? Qin-Shi nodded again. You're right. But his expression was too calm, making Emo-Tienge rather confused. Then what do you think? Qin-Shi smiled. He put his arm around her waist and leaned on her shoulder, not saying anything for a long time. Hey! Emo-Tienge crawled out of the room unwillingly. You clearly know I'm anxious to know, yet you still won't tell me. And, so you're also anxious. Qin-Shi said with a nod. You know that's not what I meant. The heavy atmosphere changed again after he said that. Qin-Shi smiled. It was unknown whether it was because he was proud of himself or because he was amused. After a long time, he finally said leisurely, everything you said makes sense, but am I someone without a plan? Only then did Qin-Shi's expression turn serious. He said, rest assured, I'm not talking nonsense. After we go back, I'll slowly tell you what happened in detail. Upon seeing his expression and hearing his words, Emo-Tienge was confused. Is there something I don't know? Qin-Shi pursed his lips and smiled, but he didn't answer. Why aren't you telling me? Emo-Tienge didn't want to give up and urged him. Now isn't the time to talk. Qin-Shi suddenly looked away. You. Just as she was about to continue asking, she suddenly saw Jing Xingji walking towards them from the corner of her eye. She hastily let go of his hand, feeling remorseful in her heart. She found that her vigilance had decreased. Her divine sense was clearly observing the surroundings, but she actually didn't notice Jing Xingji was so close to her. Or did Jing Xingji have some special means? This wasn't strange. He was already in the late stage of the core formation realm and was very strong. Maybe he had some means that prevented her divine sense from noticing him. Although she let go of his hand a long time ago, Jing Xingji had already seen it. Now that he came back, his gaze swept over them and he suddenly said to Qin-Shi, no wonder you were so rude to me this time. So that's why, Qin-Shi snorted. It's good that you know. Jing Xingji smiled and glanced at Emo-Tienge with his peach blossom eyes. Why didn't you say it earlier? If you said it, I naturally wouldn't make you unhappy. Why didn't you say it? Or were you too embarrassed to say it? Qin-Shi's expression darkened. Since you've rested enough, let's continue. Ha! Jing Xingji chuckled but his expression turned serious again. I still want to say, Qin Shoujing, you also have this day. Right after he said that, he walked away with a complacent expression. Wait. Qin-Shi frowned and said, I'll walk in front. Jing Xingji nodded indifferently and retreated to the back. If they encountered that kind of situation again, he wouldn't be able to save her if he was careless and got hit. If it was Qin-Shi, as he said, it would be easier to deal with. The three of them continued to move forward in silence. Jing Xingji really restrained himself and didn't try to seduce Emo-Tienge again, intentionally or otherwise. Emo-Tienge also heaved a sigh of relief. After walking for a while, Emo-Tienge suddenly said, Wait. The other two people stopped. Qin-Shi turned around. What's wrong? Emo-Tienge carefully looked at the surrounding scenery then said with a frown, Don't you think, our surroundings haven't changed at all? Both Qin-Shi and Jing Xingji frowned and looked around. Emo-Tienge said slowly, That's not right. Our surroundings have changed, but the changes are very subtle and almost unrecognizable. As she said that, she turned around again and her expression darkened. Can you tell where we came from? Qin Shi and Jing Xingji turned around, and their expressions changed. As far as they could see, the scenery was almost the same. They actually couldn't tell where they came from. The three of them stood for a while. Jing Xingji asked, Qin Shoujing, is there a maze formation here? Qin Shi shook his head. I don't know. You don't know. Jing Xingji didn't believe him. You actually don't know. Didn't your master tell you? Qin Shi withdrew his gaze and said, My master said it's not strange for anything to appear in Immortal's ruins. Even if we didn't encounter anything this time, every time we came here, there would be subtle changes. He then turned around and asked Imotianga, You're more proficient in formations. What do you think? During this time, Imotianga had been observing the changes around her. Her eyes, divine sense, and ears hadn't relaxed at all. Upon hearing his question, she just shook her head and said, This isn't a formation. What? Jing Xingji and Qin Shi didn't dare to believe it. A similar scene, a confusing scene. These weren't caused by a maze formation. Mo Tianga said, There must be a formation position for a formation. But use your divine sense to observe. Are there any spiritual aura fluctuations around here? Upon hearing that, the two of them released their divine senses. After a while, their expressions became more and more solemn. Even if their formations weren't good enough, they still noticed something was wrong. The spiritual aura fluctuations around here were so weak. After all, this was Immortal's ruins. The sky above Immortal's ruins was covered with a lot of immortal aura, so how could the spiritual aura here be so weak? Then what do you think it might be? I don't know. Mo Tiange looked confused. It's very strange. This doesn't conform to the way of formations, so it's not a formation. But there's no hallucinogenic thing around. I'm also confused. Qin Shi nodded. The things in Immortal's ruins are far beyond our cultivation levels, so it's not strange that you don't know. The three of them were silent. After a while, Jing Xingji asked, Then what should we do? We can't just stand here, right? Should we go or not? Qin Shi thought about it and said, Keep going. If they didn't go, they would really be trapped here. Okay. Jing Xingji didn't have any objections. He was also a bold person. Mo Tiange naturally didn't object. But after walking for a while, she felt something was wrong. Ahem, why is there such a thick fog? Mo Tiange asked curiously. The fog was not only getting thicker, but it also smelled very choking. No one answered her. She didn't care. She rubbed her nose and kept walking. But after a few more steps, she immediately stopped. Something was wrong. This time, something was really wrong. There was no one around her. Upon discovering this, Mo Tianga immediately spread her divine sense. However, for some unknown reason, this fog actually blocked her divine sense from reaching her. After standing in place for a while, Mo Tianga calmed down, then raised her voice and shouted, Senior Marshal Brother. Senior Marshal Brother. Still, no one answered her. Her voice even echoed in the distance. At this moment, Mo Tianga felt her hair stand on end. The two cultivators walking in front and behind her, one in the peak stage of the core formation realm and the other in the late stage, didn't hide their breaths. What kind of power did they have? Her divine sense was very sharp, so she was always paying attention to her surroundings. But just now, these two cultivators suddenly disappeared, and she didn't even notice them before and after they disappeared. This was too terrifying. She forced herself to calm down. This was wrong, very wrong. She had to think, right? When she asked, she paid attention to the fog around her for a split second. After that split second, the two powerful breaths disappeared, and she didn't feel anything abnormal, the fog here. Thinking of this, Mo Tiange immediately searched her Qianquan bag, took out a jade bottle, and swallowed a medicinal pill. This was a heart-clearing pill, which had the effect of calming the mind. Generally speaking, taking one when one's mind was in a mess would help calm the mind. After thinking for a while, she swallowed another refreshing pill in case this fog was poisonous. Then she sat cross-legged on the ground and calmed her mind. There was definitely something wrong with this fog. It could numb a cultivator's divine sense unconsciously. Otherwise, with the sharpness of her divine sense, there was no reason she couldn't sense Qin Shi and Jing Xingji's disappearance. But now, the two of them suddenly disappeared without a trace, and she actually didn't notice them at all. She had to restore the sharpness of her divine sense to find the two people who disappeared. Time passed bit by bit. Mo Tiange was startled awake when a hand pressed on her shoulder. "What's wrong?" Jing Xingji looked at her with a frown. She was stunned. She turned around to look for Qin Shi, but Jing Xingji said, "No need to look. I looked for a long time and only saw you sitting here. I don't know where Qin Shoujing is." Chapter 292. She was separated from Qin Shi. Upon realizing this, Mo Tiange heaved a sigh. There were so many strange things in Immortal's ruins that she had to think about every step she took. Under such circumstances, it was really difficult to move forward without someone she could trust. Jing Xingji was a person Qin Shi thought was generally trustworthy, but that wasn't necessarily true for her. This person was a typical utilitarian. Even though he was used to fawning over women and had thrown her countless flirtatious glances along the way, in the depths of his heart, he only used strength to measure strength. If there was any possibility of her dragging him down, he would unceremoniously leave her behind. Thinking of this, Mo Tiange cheered up. In any case, she had to persevere and find Qin Shi. "Fellow Daoist Jing, what do you think about the current situation?" Upon hearing her question, Jing Xingji still looked lazy and said, "There's something wrong with this fog." Nonsense, she also knew there was something wrong. Seeing that Jing Xingji was just dealing with her, Mo Tiange said bluntly, "With fellow Daoist Jing's experience, you should know more than this, right?" Jing Xingji smiled and glanced at her. "I also know that this fog has a great impact on divine senses. Fellow Daoist Qingwei, your divine sense can't play any role here." Mo Tiange's eyes moved, but she didn't say anything. Jing Xingji's current attitude was very clear. He wanted to see if she had a way. If she had a way, he might try his best. If she didn't, he probably didn't want to carry a burden. Realizing this, Mo Tiange lowered her head and pondered. Fog. Divine sense. All of a sudden. She asked, "Fellow Daoist Jing, when we were separated just now, what did you feel?" Jing Xingji thought for a while then said, "I felt. I didn't feel anything. It was like I was lost in thought for a while, and when I turned around, I found you were gone." Mo Tiange nodded. "It seems this fog can paralyze our divine senses and make our senses wrong." Jing Xingji nodded carelessly. Mo Tiange said, "I'm afraid it's more than that. Even if it paralyzes our divine senses, there's no reason we can't find them by the time we react. Perhaps it can even mislead our senses." Upon hearing this, Jing Xingji took another look at her. Mo Tiange didn't understand the meaning behind his gaze, so she continued to say, "That being the case, we can't trust our divine senses and senses." Jing Xingji chuckled. "That being the case, does fellow Daoist Qingwei have a solution?" His attitude was very casual. Obviously, he didn't think Mo Tiange could solve the current situation. Without saying anything, Emotianga took out a flying sword from her Qianquan bag, then lowered her head and started to carve something on the ground. In fact, Jing Xingji knew very well in his heart that Qin Shi had high standards. Since this junior martial sister of his was accepted as Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple and also received special treatment from him, she definitely had some outstanding qualities. Jing Xingji didn't believe that guy, Qin Shoujing, would take a fancy to an idiot. However, he also didn't think too highly of Mo Tiange because the so-called title of genius was too exaggerated. People who cultivated fast might not necessarily be strong, and people with high comprehension might not necessarily be quick-witted. But when he saw what Mo Tiange drew on the ground, his expression turned serious. This is, Mo Tiange put away her flying sword and took out a sound-transmitting jade talisman from her robe. This jade talisman was a 1,000-mile sound-transmitting talisman. It was prepared to be used when they were separated, but she didn't have many of them, so she didn't use them immediately when they were separated to avoid wasting them in the fog. The sound-transmitting jade talisman ignited with a fiery red light. It was about to break through the sky and fly away, but it fell again after flying only several feet. Jing Xingji was disappointed. Even the sound-transmitting talisman doesn't work. Mo Tiange was only stunned for a moment. She then continued to draw her flying sword and carve on the ground. What she drew was the position of an ancient 8 trigrams formation diagram, which came from the Xuanji formation book. In the fog, the naked eye could only see several feet ahead. If they walked casually, they would be like a headless fly, unable to distinguish directions. If they walked according to this 8 trigrams formation diagram, they would at least know which direction they were going and wouldn't go astray. Even if it was a dead end, they could go back the way they came. After she finished drawing the formation diagram, Mo Tiange carefully examined the surrounding scenery. After confirming there was no danger, she chose a direction and took the lead. Jing Xingji lowered his head to look at the formation diagram she drew. Without saying anything, he followed her. This time, the two of them didn't get separated. Since they knew the fog could paralyze divine senses, the two of them were very careful. After walking for a while, Mo Tiange once again drew the formation diagram and repeated the process several times. Since the sound-transmitting talisman couldn't be used, she could only leave an imprint. Although Qin Shi couldn't be considered proficient in formations, he should be able to recognize her words. If he saw her, he could follow the formation diagram to find her, and the two of them could reunite. Just like that, she and Jing Xingji walked further and further away from each other. Qin Shi soon realized he was lost. Moreover, when he turned around, Mo Tiange and Jing Xingji were nowhere to be seen. He didn't panic. He unfolded the 3-yang real fire sword and circled around his body. He then closed his eyes and spread his divine sense. But soon, he discovered he couldn't spread his divine sense, and he couldn't even use the sound-transmitting talisman. Realizing his situation, Qin Shi thought for a while and did the same thing as Mo Tiange. He took medicinal pills and meditated. Unfortunately, during this period of time when he was calm, no one came to pat him on the shoulder. After a long time, he opened his eyes and found his divine sense still couldn't spread in the fog. It seemed the fog itself was blocking his divine sense, not his divine sense being disturbed by the fog. He sat for a while, but the solution he chose was completely different from Mo Tiange's. He wasn't good at formations, so he didn't think of using formations as a mark. Instead, he waved his sleeves and brandished the sword light of the 3-yang real fire sword, burning the fog. Under the pressure of the fiery red sword light, the fog dispersed, but when he stopped for a moment, it swept over again. Qin Shi stopped. This fog was very similar to the light smoke just now. Although it wasn't corrosive, it wasn't afraid of his sword light either. After thinking for a while, he straightened the sword and wiped the sword with 2 fingers of his right hand. Blood flowed out, emitting a dazzling light. He didn't tell Jing Xingji the truth. Extreme Yang Real Fire could be used to defend against enemies. The 3 Yang Real Fire sword once again brandished the sword light. Under the Extreme Yang Real Fire, the fog was finally burned away bit by bit, and a bright view appeared. Qin Shi stopped using the Extreme Yang Real Fire sword and cautiously walked forward. He hadn't walked far when he suddenly heard a loud rumble. Qin Shi listened attentively, and his expression changed. This was the sound of fighting. Moreover, the sound wasn't small, it was at least a nascent soul cultivator. He only thought for a moment before he used his body technique and ran toward the source of the sound. He had been separated from Emotianga, but he was sure she wasn't too far away. The sound was too loud, so Emotianga would definitely hear it. At that time, the two of them could meet at the source of the sound. After flying for a while, the fog around him became thinner and thinner without him noticing, and he finally ran out of the scope of the fog. But this didn't make Qin Shi feel relieved, because as soon as he came out of the fog, he was locked on by several divine senses. This place was a huge crater. It was said that this crater was left behind by the immortals of the distant past era who used some earth-shattering fire magic art. For millions of years, the fire had never been extinguished. There was also a legend that the fire in this volcano was comparable to the Samadhi real fire, one of the 3 great real fires. Unfortunately, for so many years, no one had ever been able to take away the real fire. Now, there were 2 groups of 4 nascent soul cultivators standing on the edge of this crater. There were 3 people on one side, and there was only 1 cultivator wrapped in black aura on the other side. Qin Shi glanced at them and frowned because the nascent soul cultivator standing alone was the number 1 late-stage nascent soul cultivator in the celestial pole, Master Song Feng. Although he looked calm, he was complaining in his heart. He wasn't afraid of other nascent soul cultivators. After all, he was Lord Daoist Jinghe's disciple and his cultivation level wasn't bad, so others would always give him some face. Even if they didn't give him face, he could always run away if he couldn't defeat them. But this Master Song Feng was an anomaly. This person had a grudge against both his master and himself, and he was also very skilled. When he left Mount Taikong last time, he was almost killed by Master Song Feng. If he hadn't launched a secret technique in time and the nascent soul cultivators from his school hadn't come to greet him, he would have lost his life. Now, they met this person on Demonic Mountain. He just hoped Tiange wouldn't come. Otherwise, it would be even more difficult for the 2 of them to escape. Oh! Master Song Feng was quite surprised to see him, but then he chuckled and said, "God treats me well today. Qin Shoujing, you little kid actually delivered yourself to my door." At that moment, Qin Shi's gaze swept over the 3 nascent soul cultivators in front of Master Song Feng, and his heart settled. The 3 nascent soul cultivators were all in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. One was a young female cultivator, one was a middle-aged scholar, and the last was a handsome Daoist. He knew all 3 of them. The young female cultivator and the middle-aged scholar were wearing elegant white clothes with green hairpins and clouds embroidered on their cuffs. They were a pair of Dao companions from Biyun sect. The female cultivator was called Ding Wan, and the scholar was called Feng Xiao. They were known as the Wan and Feng immortal couple in the celestial pole. They were the only pair of Dao companions whose cultivation levels were above the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, so they were very famous. The handsome Daoist was surnamed Ji, and people called him Daoist Priest Ji. He was from Tiandao sect. These 3 people all had some friendship with his master, and their relationship was passable. Judging from the current situation, they had already fallen out with Master Song Feng, so they would more or less protect him. Thinking up to this point, he smiled slightly and didn't pay attention to Master Song Feng. Instead, he politely saluted the three nascent soul cultivators. Senior Ding, Senior Feng, Senior Ji, it's been a long time since we last met. Seniors, are you all well? Seeing that he was so polite, Ding Wan smiled and said, Qin brat, why are you also here? Where's your master? Qin Shi was already 200 years old. Among core formation cultivators, he could be considered young, but he wasn't old enough to be called brat casually. Ding Wan, on the other hand, looked like she was in her prime, but her real age was 700 or 800 years old. Calling him the brat was an act of respect. Qin Shi said, Junior came to Demonic Mountain this time on the orders of my master. My master isn't far away and will arrive soon. He naturally made this up to tell Master Song Feng that his master was here. Upon hearing what he said, Master Song Feng snorted coldly. Qin Shoujing, do you think I'll believe you just because you say it casually? It's best that you delivered yourself to my door today. After I get rid of the three of them, I'll also get rid of you to avenge my poor disciple. Before Qin Shi could answer, Feng Shao already sneered and said, Old Song Feng, aren't you afraid that the wind will sprain your tongue? Do you really think you're the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole and invincible? You're just one person. Although our cultivation levels are lower than yours, we're not to be trifled with. Ha! Black aura surged on Master Song Feng's body, and he said in a contemptuous tone, What Luan and Feng immortal couple? I really don't care. Who's the one who sprained his tongue? Chapter 293. Old Song Feng, Ding Luan said with a smile, but her tone was contemptuous. If I were you, I would have gone into hiding a long time ago, but you're still so proud of yourself. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by all the cultivators in the world? Ding Luan looked gentle, but her words were very rude. Master Song Feng, who was used to being scolded, was angry now. He sneered and said, laughed at by all the cultivators in the world. Woman surnamed Ding, why don't you drag them out and scold them for me to hear? Why are you still talking nonsense here? You're the one who likes to talk nonsense, not me. Ding Luan's tongue was like a knife, but she kept smiling. Do you really think those kids think you're the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole? I've seen people who think highly of themselves, but I've never seen anyone who thinks so highly of themselves like you. Let's not talk about the past. Let's see if this Qin brat takes you seriously or not. Qin Shi smiled bitterly in his heart. Although he had a grudge against Master Song Feng, he wasn't arrogant enough to think he could escape from a great late-stage, nascent soul cultivator with his own strength. Right now, he wanted to use the presence of the three nascent soul cultivators to dilute his sense of existence, but this senior Ding pushed him out to attract Master Song Feng's attention. However, he couldn't blame Ding Luan. For Lord Daoist Jinghe's sake, Ding Luan was willing to protect him, which was already good enough. Master Song Feng's figure hidden in the black aura couldn't be seen clearly, but he glanced at them fiercely and said, Woman Ding, don't talk nonsense. Since you're not willing to give way, don't blame me for being ruthless. As he spoke, his whole body merged into the black aura and suddenly attacked the three people. Although their words were full of contempt, the three people didn't dare to underestimate Master Song Feng's attack. Ding Luan and Feng Shao both retreated at the same time, using their teleportation techniques and magic weapons. Both of their magic weapons were musical instruments. Ding Luan held the zither and Feng Shao held the flute, instantly spreading a thick music net. Master Song Feng's black aura looked fierce, but it was blocked by this music net. Upon seeing this, Daoist Ji smiled faintly. He took out a huge wine gourd from his bosom and took a sip leisurely. All of a sudden, he opened his mouth, and the fine wine in his mouth shot out like an arrow towards Master Song Feng's black aura. Master Song Feng withdrew the devil aura all over his body and swiftly retreated. Although his words were arrogant and his methods were ruthless, he was not an arrogant person. Although he said that he looked down on the Wan and Phoenix immortal couple, he understood in his heart that the couple's cultivation was not bad and their teamwork was quite good. Their fighting strength was not inferior to a late-stage cultivator, so he could not take them lightly. What's more, there was Daoist Ji next to him. Daoist Ji didn't like to talk, and some people even said that he was a mute. However, when he made a move, he was extremely sharp. He often set up hidden traps, and people would unknowingly fall into his trap. Therefore, even though his tone was arrogant, he didn't dare to be careless in his heart and was extremely cautious. However, since he had already made his move, there was no reason for him to stop. As soon as they saw Master Song Feng retreating, Ding Wan and Feng Shao rushed forward. The sound of the flute changed to the sound of the zither. The music, which was originally as deep as the yellow sky and thick earth, became sonorous and fierce, shaking people's hearts and souls. Qin Shi was stimulated by the sound of the zither and flute, and he felt the spiritual aura inside his body surging. He almost couldn't control it, so he immediately steadied his mind and wholeheartedly guided the spiritual aura back. Humph! Insignificant skill. Master Song Feng snorted coldly. A black object suddenly flew out of the black aura. Its speed was extremely fast, and it suddenly smashed towards the Wan and Feng couple. As soon as this black object left the range of Master Song Feng's black aura, it suddenly swelled up. In an instant, it became like a small mountain and suddenly pressed down on the Wan and Feng couple. Seeing this, the sound of the Wan and Feng couple changed, becoming simple and deep again. But this time, it wasn't so easy to block. Master Song Feng grinned hideously. The small mountain broke through the net of music and pressed down on the two of them with great momentum. Ding Wan and Feng Shao looked extremely solemn. The couple looked at each other, stopped playing, and each threw the zither and flute in their hands. These two magic weapons carried extremely dense spiritual aura, and under the support of the couple's spiritual aura, they suddenly burst into dazzling spiritual light. Qin Shi felt it was extremely dazzling, so he couldn't help but raise his hand to block the spiritual light. This wasn't the first time he saw nascent soul cultivators fighting. He had an extraordinarily powerful nascent soul master, so his vision was originally very high. However, when he saw these people fighting, he still felt he couldn't watch them closely. Nascent soul cultivators were nascent soul cultivators after all. Although he was only one step away from the nascent soul realm, his strength was still far from them. If he had already formed his nascent soul now, even if he was only in the early stage of the nascent soul realm, he definitely wouldn't be completely powerless when facing these people. Master Song Feng, Ding Wan and Feng Shao were fighting fiercely, but there was also a quiet Daoist Ji next to them. Daoist Ji looked to be in his early 20s and looked very delicate. Rumor had it that when he traveled outside, people often regarded him as an aura-refining disciple who didn't understand worldly affairs, but when it came to fighting, he was no less ruthless than Master Song Feng. Over the years, it was unknown how many blind cultivators had been deceived by his harmless appearance and died in his hands. In the spiritual light of the fight between Master Song Feng, Ding Wan and Feng Shao, Qin Shi couldn't see their movements clearly, but he knew this was the best time. Therefore, he quietly took out a jade talisman from his Chinkuan bag and flicked it with his fingertips. The jade talisman burst into flames and soared into the sky under the cover of the spiritual light. Fortunately, this time, he finally sent it out smoothly. The jade talisman disappeared into the sky, and the fight suddenly stopped. The devil aura on Master Song Feng's body disappeared and he snorted coldly. Qin Shoujing, what the hell are you doing now? Qin Shi smiled. He knew this old man wouldn't let him go easily even though he hadn't dealt with him yet. Nothing. Junior just wanted to inform my master that there's a good show to watch. Master Song Feng didn't say anything for a while, but the black aura on his body kept surging as if it was brewing and he might attack Qin Shi in the next moment. His attention was focused on Qin Shi, so how could the three nascent soul cultivators let go of this opportunity? Ding Wuan shouted. She held the zither with one hand and held the strings with the other, then suddenly pulled and loosened it. The strings suddenly let out a buzzing sound, and the spiritual sound suddenly spread out. Feng Shao turned his fingers and clasped the jade flute, then he brought it to his lips and blew it in a relaxed manner. The husband and wife, one attacking and one defending, one tightening and one loosening, cooperated seamlessly. Even though Master Song Feng was known as the #1 cultivator in the celestial pole, he didn't dare to look down on them. The black aura on his body became thicker and thicker, and it suddenly scattered like a drop of ink. The black aura on Master Song Feng's body was known as Primordial Devil Aura. If this Primordial Devil Aura danced, it would be like gales and thunder with amazing power. The Primordial Devil Aura scattered and condensed into a long saber that was about to chop the Wan and Feng couple. But in an instant, the black long saber suddenly changed direction and chopped to the right side of the back. Ah, there was a scream. It was Daoist Ji, who had just quietly hid behind Master Song Feng. Hearing Daoist Ji's scream, Qin Shi's first thought was that this person really wasn't mute. Then he thought that Master Song Feng was worthy of being a great cultivator in the late nascent soul stage. Even a bystander like him couldn't see through him. In the middle of a fight, Master Song Feng could actually beat him at his own game and create a diversion. Humph. Master Song Feng snorted. Stinky Daoist, do you really think no one noticed? A vicious expression instantly appeared on Daoist Ji's delicate and harmless face. He ignored the saber of devil aura that had sunk into his shoulder and suddenly flicked his hands. A tiny object flew towards Master Song Feng's face. Master Song Feng was about to dodge, but the two of them were too close. He didn't manage to dodge and was hit. As soon as this thing was thrown onto Master Song Feng's body, it immediately made a huge explosion. Ah! This time, it was Master Song Feng's voice. This time, it was Daoist Ji who sneered. He grabbed the saber of devil aura that had sunk into his shoulder, threw it away, and said in a hoarse voice, "Old Song Feng, how does the sky explosion thunder taste?" The primordial devil aura on Master Song Feng's body seemed to have gathered and scattered, and he seemed to have suffered a heavy injury. Ding Wuan and Feng Shao looked at each other and both attacked. Just as Master Song Feng was about to bear the heavy attack of the three nascent soul cultivators, a black shadow flashed. Master Song Feng instantly left his original spot and appeared in midair. The black aura around him condensed and solidified again. Ignorant children. Master Song Feng snorted coldly. Do you really think that I'll be at your mercy after taking this blow? At this time, he was floating in midair, and his primordial devil aura didn't diminish at all. It seemed that he hadn't been injured at all. The three nascent soul cultivators were stunned, and a look of surprise appeared on their faces. Fellow Daoist Ji, Ding Wuan said in a low voice, "This is..." Daoist Ji was also in disbelief. The expression on his face kept changing. He stared at Master Song Feng and said, "Impossible, he's bluffing. Fellow Daoists, you know the power of the sky explosion thunder." This old man took it head on. "I absolutely don't believe he's fine." Feng Zhao's expression changed for a while, and then he said, "Fellow Daoist Ji is right. Sister Wan, don't be fooled by him." Hearing what her husband said, Ding Wuan no longer had any doubts. She put away her zither and was ready to go. Right at this moment, several flight lights suddenly flashed across the sky and came in their direction. The incoming people were also divided into two groups, coming from two different directions. That's old Daoist fooling. Feng Shao murmured as he looked at the group of people that gradually became clearer. Daoist Ji's expression darkened. More than 100 years ago, I had some conflicts with this old Daoist. I'm afraid Ding Wan and Feng Shao were silent. Old Daoist Fuling should actually be called Venerable Swordsman Fuling. He was one of the venerable swordsmen in Gujin sect. He entered the sect through Dao, so he always dressed like a secular Daoist, so they called him Old Daoist. Although they were all from the 7 great cultivation groups and would show some respect for each other because they were friends, it was hard to say when interests were at stake. At this time, another group of people also flew closer. Daoist Ji frowned even more. Qin Jinghe, Ding Wan and Feng Shao looked at each other with a mysterious look in their eyes. Logically speaking, Qin Jinghe had a pretty good relationship with them, but the problem was that the reason they were fighting against Master Song Feng was because they wanted to fight over the treasure. With the treasure right in front of them, who knew whether or not they would try to snatch it by force? At this time, Feng Shao secretly glanced at Qin Shi next to him, and Ding Wan nodded secretly. Feng Shao suddenly moved and instantly flashed to Qin Shi's side. He said with a smile, "Brat Qin, do us a favor." Although Qin Shi had been vigilant, Feng Shao was a middle-stage, nascent soul cultivator after all. He had just summoned the 3 young real fire sword when Feng Shao's palm hit his head. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.